Imagine walking through a city where every stone has been shaped by time, every street paved not just for feet but for centuries of footsteps echoing into the future. The air is warm and still, carrying the scent of olive trees swaying in courtyards, of fresh bread pulled from clay ovens, of incense drifting from small household shrines where families leave offerings to gods who watch over doorways and dreams. Above you, the sky stretches in an unbroken arc of deep blue, fading slowly into night as the first stars appear sharp, clear, unmoving, like silver pins holding the fabric of the heavens in place. Below, the city breathes with quiet purpose. Fountain murmurs in a shaded square. Children laugh as they chase each other between columns. An old man reads aloud from a scroll beneath a portico lit by oil lamps that flicker like fireflies in the gathering dark. This is Rome, not as it fell, but as it lived. Not in ruins, not in memory, but in fullness. At the heart of an empire so vast it touches deserts, mountains, forests, and seas, yet feels unified by something deeper than borders. A language, a law, a way of moving through the world that makes distant provinces feel like extensions of this very soil. Here, aqueducts march across valleys on graceful arches, delivering water to fountains, baths, and homes as reliably as the sun rises. Roads cut straight through hills and forests, built so solidly they will outlast empires, worn smooth by the tread of soldiers. Merchants, pilgrims, and messengers carrying news that shapes the fate of nations. In the markets, voices rise in Latin, Greek, Aramaic, and Punic goods from Egypt, silk from the east, wine from Gaul, grain from Africa, flowing into the center, as if the entire known world pours its riches into a single beating heart. And tonight, you are standing inside that heart. You are not a visitor, not a ghost, but someone allowed to walk these streets as if you belong. There is no rush, no urgency. No need to prove yourself or understand everything at once. You simply move through the evening light, feeling the warmth of sun-baked marble under your hand as you lean against a railing overlooking the forum. You hear the low hum of conversation from a nearby garden, the clink of cups, the rustle of papyrus being unfolded. Somewhere, a flute plays softly, barely louder than the wind. A woman adjusts her shawl as she walks home, her sandals tapping gently against the stone. A dog sleeps curled beside a shop entrance, undisturbed by the slow pulse of the city around him. This was a world that believed in permanence, that trusted in order, that assumed tomorrow would be much like today's children going to school, farmers tending fields, senators debating laws, sailors loading ships bound for distant ports. It was not perfect. There was hardship, inequality, suffering hidden behind high walls. But there was also stability, a sense that systems worked, that power had rules, that civilization had finally learned how to endure. Yet even now, beneath this surface of peace, something subtle is shifting. Not with fanfare, not with war drums or declarations, but in quiet ways. A letter delayed from the frontier, shortage of grain in the market, a new emperor crowned not by choice but by the will of soldiers far from Rome. The cracks are not visible yet. They are felt like a change in the wind, like the moment before a storm, when birds fall silent and the air grows heavy. The empire continues. Life goes on, but the rhythm has altered, ever so slightly, like a clock that still ticks, but no longer keeps perfect time. Tonight, we will walk through this long twilight, the slow, quiet descent of a world that once thought itself eternal. We won't focus on battles or betrayals, though they exist. We won't linger on names and dates, except when they breathe meaning into lives long gone. Instead, we'll follow the whispers, the farmer watching his son leave for the army, the scribe copying laws he knows may never be enforced, the mother praying in a half-empty temple as new beliefs begin to spread. We'll see how greatness does not always end in fire, but sometimes fades like candlelight at dawn, still beautiful, still present, until one moment it is simply gone. If you're listening from a room softened by shadows, wrapped in warmth as the night settles outside your window, know that you are not far from this past. The chair you sit on, the lamp beside you, the very idea of citizenship or justice you carry fragments of Rome within the world you live in. And if you'd like to share where you're listening from, what time it is, where you are, whether rain falls quietly beyond your glass or the moon hangs full above your roof, I would love to know. Your presence here, gentle and still, becomes part of this story too. So let your breath slow, let your thoughts soften, let the weight of the day slip away, carried off like leaves on a river. This is not a lecture, it's not a race through history. It's a journey one taken at night, at walking pace, through the final peaceful moments of a civilization that shaped the world. Close your eyes if you wish, and let us begin. Long before the roads grew silent, long before the aqueducts ran dry, and the forums became overgrown with weeds, Rome stood not as a memory, but as a living presence. Woven into the rhythm of daily life like breath or heartbeat, like sunlight falling across stone at the same angle every morning. This was not an empire defined by its end, but by its endurance, by the way it shaped mornings and evenings, work and rest, hope and routine, across thousands of miles. From the foggy coasts of Britannia to the sun-scorched plains of Numidia, from the mountain passes of Hispania to the bustling ports of Syria, to be alive in this time was to live inside a world that had learned how to hold itself together, not through force alone, but through habit, law, infrastructure, and the quiet trust that tomorrow would resemble today, that the systems in place were strong enough to outlast any single storm. There were no banners proclaiming this stability, no speeches reminding people of their good fortune, because it was simply assumed. Like the rising of the sun, or the flow of water through pipes buried beneath city streets, the peace was so complete, so deeply embedded in the fabric of existence, that it became invisible, unnoticed until much later, when its absence would be felt in every cold night, every broken bridge, every unanswered letter. Imagine waking in a home built of sun-warmed brick and timber, nestled within a neighborhood where generations have lived and died, where the walls hold echoes of laughter, arguments, lullabies, hummed to infants in the dark. The room is small, but comfortable. Lit only by the soft gray light of dawn filtering through a square opening covered with thin sheets of translucent gypsum. Not glass, allowing shapes to blur and soften beyond the frame. The air inside carries the lingering scent of last night's oil lamp. Olive. Oil burns slowly through the evening, and beneath it, the earthy aroma of dried herbs, bundled and hung from wooden beams above. Rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, bay leaf for protection. All left there by the mistress of the house, as both practical measure and quiet ritual. A woolen blanket rests at the foot of a low bed made of wood and rope mesh, slightly sagging with age, yet still serviceable. Outside, the city stirs gently. Not with urgency, but with the steady pulse of routine. A baker opens his oven, releasing a thick cloud of steam and the rich golden aroma of barley and wheat bread baking in clay. Chickens scratch at packed dirt in small courtyards, pecking at scattered grain. A slave draws water from a courtyard well, the rope creaking softly against the wooden pulley, the bucket rising with a slowest mixed splash that breaks the silence like a metronome marking the beginning of another day. Somewhere down the street a donkey brays once, then falls quiet. A child coughs in a neighboring room, and above it all the sky lightens from indigo to pale blue, the stars fading one by one, as if retreating into memory. In the streets, people move with purpose, but without rush, their footsteps familiar on stones worn smooth by decades of passage. Men in simple tunics walk toward workshops where they will shape pottery on spinning wheels, mend sandals with waxed thread and awls, or weave cloth on looms that have stood in the same corner for generations, their frames carved with initials of past weavers now gone. Women carry baskets to market, their steps measured, their voices low, as they greet neighbors from doorways, exchanging news of health, weather, births, and deaths, in tones that rise and fall like conversation between old friends. Children run ahead barefoot and laughing, chasing a ball made of stitched leather or pretending to be legionaries marching toward distant frontiers, their wooden swords clattering against their sides. Above them, laundry flutters between buildings on lines stretched across narrow alleys. Dyed cloths waving like quiet flags in the morning breeze. Red-edged stolas, children's garments still small enough to fit in one hand. Shopkeepers unlatch wooden shutters, fold them back with a gentle thud, and begin arranging goods behind low counters. Jars of honey, strings of garlic, bundles of lentils tied with twine, fresh fish laid on beds of ice brought down from mountain caves during the night. No one shouts, No one pushes. There is no chaos, only the slow unfolding of a day that has begun this way for years. Perhaps centuries, in cities just like this one scattered across the empire. The heart of the city beats strongest in the forum, the open square, where politics, commerce, faith, and social life converge like rivers meeting in a valley. Here, marble porticos rise on all sides, sheltering rows of shops and offices where scribes sit behind low desks. Quills in hand, recording debts, contracts, wills, and property transfers on wax tablets or papyrus scrolls, inked in careful Latin script. Their fingers are stained with soot-based ink, their eyes tired but focused. Their minds trained to remember names, dates, and obligations without error. Merchants call out their wares in steady, unhurried voices. Fresh figs from Campania, still warm from the sun. Olives preserved in oil and flavored with fennel. Jars of garum, the fermented fish sauce that flavors nearly every meal, its sharp temps lingering in the air like salt spray. Pilgrims pause at shrines along the edge of the square, leaving small coins or wildflowers at the feet of stone gods who watch with calm, expressionless faces. Jupiter with his thunderbolt, Minerva with her owl, Vesta with her eternal flame burning in a small hearth tended by elderly priestesses. A man kneels briefly, touches his forehead to the ground, rises, and walks away without a word. No one watches him. Such moments are private, sacred, ordinary. Not far away, the great baths begin to open their doors, their domed roofs rising like gentle hills above the rooftops. Smoke and steam already rising from vents in the roof as slaves stoke the hippocausts beneath the floors, warming the rooms where citizens will gather later to bathe, exercise, read, and talk. The baths are more than places of cleanliness. They are centers of community, where men of different classes meet, where ideas pass from mouth to mouth like currency, where philosophy mingles with gossip, where business is conducted between dips in warm water. A senator might walk beside a shopkeeper, discussing the harvest, the price of grain, or rumors from the eastern provinces, neither feeling out of place in the other's company. Young athletes stretch on the exercise yard, their bodies glistening with oil, preparing for games or military training. Older men sit on benches, reading scrolls borrowed from the bathhouse library, their lips moving silently as they follow the text. Steam curls upward in slow spirals, catching the early light, making the space feel dreamlike, suspended between worlds. Even here, there is ordered timetables for cleaning, schedules for heating, roles assigned to each worker, but it runs so smoothly that no one notices it, like the air they breathe. Even in the provinces, far from the 7 hills of Rome, this sense of cohesion holds, not through conquest, but through imitation, integration, and the slow adoption of Roman ways. In Gaul, a town planner uses Roman measurements to lay out new streets in perfect right angles, drains built beneath them to carry rainwater away, public fountains placed at regular intervals. In North Africa, farmers pay taxes in grain that will be shipped across the sea to feed the capital, their sons wearing togas during festivals, speaking Latin in schools taught by retired soldiers. In Syria, a local governor writes his reports in Latin, even if he speaks Aramaic at home, signs imperial decrees. Overseas construction of temples dedicated to Roman gods, or to Roma and the emperor himself. Roads connect them all wide, straight, paved with stone, marked by milestones that show the distance to Rome as if measuring devotion. Each one carved with the name of the current emperor and the number of miles remaining. Messengers ride along them, soldiers patrol them, pilgrims walk them, each step reinforcing the invisible thread that binds the empire together. A traveler from Britain could reach Egypt and still find familiar architecture, legal customs, coinage, and language. He might not understand everything, but he would never feel entirely lost. Life is not equal for everyone. There are those who labor under heavy burdens, who live in cramped rooms with little light, who serve others without choice. Slavery is common, accepted, part of the fabric of society, passed down through families, bought and sold in markets near the harbor. Yet even among hardship, there is dignity in routine, comfort in familiarity, kind of belonging that comes from knowing one's place in the order of things. A family gathers at dusk around a small oil lamp, sharing a meal of lentils, bread, and wine watered down for safety. Their voices low, their movements unhurried. A father tells stories of heroes from old legends: Aeneas fleeing Troy, Horatius holding the bridge, Mucus Scaevola thrusting his hand into fire. A mother hums a lullaby while mending a torn tunic, her fingers moving with practiced ease. A child leans against her knee, half asleep, listening to the sound of rain beginning to tap on the roof. These moments do not appear in histories, not in inscriptions or official records, but they are what make a civilization real. They are what give it weight, texture, soul. They are why, when the empire finally fades, it will not vanish all at once, but dissolve slowly, like mist over a river at dawn. At night, when the sky fills with stars and the wind moves quietly through olive groves outside the city walls, there is a deep stillness. No alarms sound, no walls tremble. The guards at the gates yawn and shift their weight, watching the road for any traveler who might arrive after dark. Their spears resting upright beside them, their cloaks pulled tight against the cooling air. Inside homes, people sleep beneath woolen blankets, listening to the soft breathing of loved ones nearby, the occasional bark of a dog, the distant chime of a temple bell marking the hour. The empire does not feel fragile, does not feel temporary. It feels inevitable, as natural as the seasons, as constant as the tides. Parents tuck their children into bed thinking of school tomorrow, of lessons in grammar and arithmetic, of games in the courtyard. Farmers lie awake wondering if the rains will come in time for planting. Lovers whisper promises by lamplight, believing they have all the time in the world. And high above, the stars burn cold and clear, different to human dreams, yet bearing silent witness to a moment of rare stability, civilization at peace with itself, unaware that it is standing at the peak of its long journey, that the path ahead will not be uphill, but gently, almost imperceptibly downward. We are standing here now, not to witness collapse, but to remember what existed before the fall. To feel the warmth of sunlight on stone, the murmur of conversation in a marketplace. The steady pulse of a civilization that believed deeply and without question that it would always go on. Because sometimes the most powerful thing about an ending is not how it happens, but what it means to lose something so quietly certain. Something so deeply woven into the everyday that its absence cannot be measured in ruins. But in silence where there was once laughter, in emptiness where there was once life. Far from the marble heart of Rome, where senators still gather beneath vaulted ceilings, carved with images of gods and eagles, where messengers arrive with scrolls sealed in red wax bearing the imperial insignia, life continues, much as it always has on the surface. In the provinces where the empire stretches thin across mountains veiled in mist, across deserts that shimmer under relentless sun, across coastlines where waves crash against cliffs older than memory, people wake to the same rhythms that have marked their days for generations. The crowing of roosters at dawn echoes through quiet alleys. Wooden gates creak open on iron hinges, worn smooth by decades of use. Smoke rises from clay ovens buried in the earth, carrying the warm, golden scent of barley and wheat bread baking slowly through the morning air. A farmer in North Africa walks his field just after sunrise, barefoot on soil still cool from the night, running his fingers through the stalks of wheat, checking for signs of drought, feeling the weight of each ear between his thumb and forefinger, calculating how much will be left after taxes are taken. A fisherman in Gaul stands on the rocky shore, mending his nets with practiced hands, the salt crusted on his skin. Humming an old tune passed down from his father, one without words but full of longing. A scribe in Antioch sits beneath the shade of a fig tree, unrolling a papyrus scroll weighted at the corners with smooth river stones. Copying tax records with careful strokes of his reed pen dipped in soup-based ink, the Latin script neat and uniform, though he speaks Aramaic at home and dreams in a language no longer written. To them, Rome is not a city they have seen with their own eyes, but a name-man idea carried on paper, spoken in official tones. A distant authority that sends laws, collects taxes, and promises protection in return. And for now, that promise still holds, fragile but present, like a thread stretched across a great distance, trembling slightly in the wind, yet unbroken. But even as life unfolds with its familiar patterns, something subtle begins to shift, not in any single moment, but in the spaces between moments, in the pauses during conversation. in the way a merchant hesitates before sending his caravan east, in the growing silence where there was once swift reply. Yet something has begun to change, not with fanfare or war drums, but quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first chill before winter arrives. It starts with small things, so small they might be dismissed as coincidence, bad luck, or mere inconvenience. A letter delayed by weeks, then months, its seal broken not by officials in the forum, but by soldiers at a frontier post who read it out of curiosity or suspicion and pass it along with a shrug. A shipment of grain from Egypt fails to arrive on time, delayed by storms or pirates or bureaucratic confusion in Alexandria, and the market in a Gallic town runs short by midwinter. The price rises, families eat less, children go to bed with empty stomachs, not knowing why. No one speaks of crisis, not yet. There is no rebellion, no outcry, only quiet adjustments made behind closed doors. Mothers begin to hoard flour in clay jars sealed with wax beneath their beds, measuring portions more carefully, stretching meals with lentils and wild greens. Men speak quietly in doorways after dark, voices low, glancing over their shoulders as they ask whether the legions still guard the sea routes as they should, whether the new emperor even knows these towns exist. These are not acts of defiance. They are acts of preparation, like birds sensing pressure in the air before a storm, like trees shedding leaves before the cold comes. Still, the world turns. The sun rises. The markets open. Life goes on. But beneath the surface, trust the invisible foundation of empire begins to erode. Grain by grain, like sand slipping through fingers. In Britannia, where the wind sweeps endlessly across misty hills and stone forts cling to the edge of the known world like sentinels guarding the end of maps. The changes are more visible, more tangible. The garrison at Hadrian's Wall, once filled with 500 soldiers in polished armor, their standards flying proudly in the northern wind, now houses barely half that number. Some have been transferred south, called away by orders no one fully understands, written in haste, bearing seals that look unfamiliar. Others have simply stayed away, choosing to settle with local women, build homes of timber and turf, raise children who speak both Latin and the old Celtic tongue, who know Roman law, but worship ancestral spirits beneath ancient oaks. The remaining guards still walk their rounds at dusk, still light the signal fires when strangers approach from beyond the moors, still stand watch through long, freezing nights, but their steps are slower. Their armor less polished, their boots worn thin at the heel, their letters home grow fewer, and when they do write, the tone is different, weary, uncertain, laced with doubt. One soldier, a man from Hispania who joined the army 20 years ago, believing he would serve Rome until death, writes to his brother, "The emperor changes again. I do not know this one's name. We follow orders because we must, but I wonder if anyone in Rome remembers us. Our pay came late. The oil rations were cut. Last week, a supply wagon never arrived. We used our own coins to buy candles." He does not send the letter. He reads it once more by lamplight, then burns it in the fire, watching the words curl into ash, blackening at the edges, vanishing into smoke. He knows that even if it reached its destination, there may be no reply, that the offices in Rome are overwhelmed, that clerks no longer answer every petition, that the center no longer hears the edges. Along the Rhine, where the river cuts through dense forests and the air carries the cold breath of northern winds, traders report that crossings have become harder, more uncertain. What once took a day now takes 3. With delays at checkpoints manned by officers who seem uncertain of their own authority, who wear uniforms that don't quite match, whose ranks are unclear. A merchant from Cologne, a man who has traveled this route since he was a boy, tells how he was stopped, not by Roman soldiers, but by men wearing mixed armors and pieces, clearly Roman, others forged locally, mismatched and crude, held together with leather straps. They spoke a dialect of Latin, thickened by Germanic sounds, their commands slow, their eyes watchful. They inspected his goods, demanded extra coin for safe passage, and let him go without marking his manifest. When he asked who commanded them, they only pointed downstream, toward a camp whose banners he did not recognize. Dark cloth. No eagle, no imperial purple. He continued his journey, but turned back earlier than planned, deciding not to risk the eastern roads. The roads, once so reliable, paved and guarded, marked with milestones every mile, now feel like threads unraveling at the edges. Like a tapestry whose colors are fading, whose weave is coming loose, he returns home, unpacks his wares, and sits by the fire, staring into the flames. Right. His son asks why they didn't reach Mainz. He says nothing. He thinks, this is not the world I was born into. In North Africa, where golden fields stretch to the horizon under skies of endless blue, and cities like Leptis Magna and Carthage thrive on trade with the eastern provinces. A different kind of unease settles, not sudden, not violent, but persistent, like a fever that won't break. The aqueduct that once brought water to the town of Leptis Magna has been leaking for months. Cracks have formed in the arches, mortar crumbling, pipes blocked with debris. Repairs were promised, engineers dispatched, but they never arrived. Or if they did, they left without fixing anything. Now families take turns drawing from the old well outside the city walls, children walking farther each day to fill their jugs, their arms growing tired. At night, elders sit outside their homes on low stools, fanning themselves in the warm air, speaking in low voices about how things were in the days of good emperors, when couriers came weekly, when granaries were full, when the roads were safe. They do not name names, they do not accuse. But there is a tone in their words, a quiet disbelief that the system they trusted could falter so slowly, so completely, without warning, without explanation. A young teacher overhears them while returning from school, her arms full of scrolls. She pauses in the shadows, listening. She thinks, if the water fails, what else will follow? She does not ask aloud. She returns to her room, lights a lamp, and reads passages from Cicero about justice and order, about the duty of leaders to protect the people. She reads them slowly, aloud, as if the words themselves might hold back the silence that is growing around them, as if reciting them could summon back the world she was taught to believe in. Even in the eastern provinces, where cities like Antioch and Alexandria still pulse with life, where scholars debate in libraries lit by oil lamps, where ships arrive daily from India and Arabia carrying spices, silks, and ivory, the rhythm has altered. The prefect of Egypt, a man who once believed in the dignity of office, writes report after report to Rome, detailing shortages, border skirmishes, unrest among workers who have not been paid in months. His messengers return with no replies, or with stamped decrees that make no sense, orders to increase grain shipments when granaries are already empty, to reinforce legions that no longer exist. Begins to suspect that whoever sits in the imperial court does not read his letters, or worse, does not understand them, that decisions are made based on flattery, not fact, that the machinery of governance has become hollow, turning on its own weight. One evening, he stands on the balcony of his residence overlooking the Nile, the river flowing dark and silent under the moon, crocodiles gliding beneath the surface like shadows. He thinks of the Ptolemies, of Cleopatra, of all the rulers who came before, and wonders if this is how empires end, not with fire, not with conquest, but with neglect, with messages lost, with silence where there should be command. He looks up at the stars, so clear here, so bright, and feels, for the first time, truly alone. And yet, life goes on. Children still play in the streets, chasing each other between columns, laughing without care. Lovers still meet in hidden gardens, whispering promises beneath olive trees. Farmers still plant seeds in the spring, trusting that the sun will rise and the rains will come, that the world will keep its word. A potter shapes a new jug on his wheel, smoothing the wet clay with practiced hands, turning it slowly, shaping it with patience, unaware that one day archaeologists will find it centuries later, buried beneath layers of dust and time, and wonder about the hands that made it, the home it belonged to, the wine it once held. A woman sings to her baby in a language that will not survive the next century, her voice soft, rhythmic, eternal. A priest lights incense before a statue of Serapis, praying for peace, for health, for the safety of travelers on distant roads. None of them know that they are living in the final decades of a world that once believed itself eternal. They only feel the small disturbances, the missed deliveries, the unanswered letters, the growing distance between center and edges, minor inconveniences, like cracks in a wall that can be mended later, like rain that will pass by morning. But the truth is that the empire is no longer moving as one body. Its limbs still function, but the mind that guides them is clouded, distracted, turning inward. Emperors rise and fall in rapid succession, many ruling for only weeks, proclaimed by armies that care more for pay than loyalty. Some die by poison, others in battle, others murdered in their sleep. The capital itself becomes unstable, not in ruins, but in spirit. The Senate meets, but its debates grow circular, its authority symbolic. The people of Rome still gather for games, still cheer for charioteers, still receive bread from the state, but the supply lines that feed them tremble under strain. Ships that once sailed reliably from Egypt now face delays, storms, piracy. Each delay is small, each shortfall manage a blend, till one day the bread does not come, and the crowd falls silent in a way that echoes through the corridors of power. These are the whispers, the quiet, accumulating signs that something is changing. It's not a single event, not a war, not a rebellion, but 1,000 tiny fractures spreading beneath the surface of daily life. A farmer in Spain decides not to plant next season. Governor in Thrace begins training local militias just in case. A mother in Rome tells her son, "You won't go to the academy? We need you here." The great machine of the empire still turns, but its gears grind with increasing resistance, and no one knows anymore who is turning the crank. And still, no alarm is sounded. No poet writes an elegy for what is being lost. No historian pauses to say, "This is the beginning of the end," because endings do not announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary days, as minor delays, as conversations held in hushed tones. They come not with thunder, but with silence, the kind that settles when a civilization stops believing in its own continuity, when the future no longer feels like a continuation of the present, but something unknown, uncharted, and quietly feared. We are walking through this moment not to assign blame, not to rush toward collapse, but to witness the fragility of order, the delicate balance that holds a world together, and how easily it can be undone. Not by enemies, but by neglect, by distance, by the slow fading of belief. Because sometimes, the most powerful force in history is not ambition or war, but the quiet decision made in 1,000 places at once to stop expecting tomorrow to be like today. There comes a moment in the life of every great thing not marked by fire, nor by war, nor by any single cry when it begins to release its hold on itself. Not because it is destroyed from without, but because it stops being rebuilt from within. This is not collapse. Not yet. It's something quieter, more intimate. A decision made in silence. A duty quietly abandoned. A belief that flickers and does not get relit. In the long twilight of Rome, this moment arrives not with a decree or a battle, but across 1,000 small surrender soldiers who stop polishing their armor, engineers who walk away from broken aqueducts, governors who no longer write reports they know will never be read. The empire still stands, vast and imposing, its laws still spoken, its coins still circulating, its name still carried on the wind, but beneath its feet, the ground has begun to shift. Not with a tremor, not with noise, but with the slow settling of weight upon foundations that are no longer being tended. And as the first stones loosen from the great structure, no one sounds an alarm. No one writes it down. They only feel it, a slight imbalance, a new uncertainty in the air, like the silence after a familiar song ends too soon, like the moment when you realize the light outside has changed without your noticing. In the eastern provinces, where cities like Antioch and Ephesus still glow with life under oil lamps each evening, where scholars debate philosophy in colonnaded courtyards, and merchants unload silks from distant lands, a governor makes a decision he would have once considered unthinkable. For years, he has relied on Roman legions to patrol the frontier, to guard trade routes, to respond when raiders cross the river at night. But the legions are gone, called back to defend Italy, disbanded in the chaos of civil war, or simply dissolved into local militias that answer to no central command. So he does what any man in power might do when left alone. He turns to those nearest, those willing to fight, regardless of origin. He enlists local chieftains, warriors from tribes once called enemies. Men who speak a mix of Greek, Latin, and their own ancestral tongue, whose loyalty has never been to Rome, but to their people, their land, their survival. Arms them, pays them from provincial funds meant for grain and roads, and gives them authority to defend the towns, the granaries, the temples. They wear no uniform, carry no eagle standard, march to no drumbeat, but they keep order. They protect the markets. They escort caravans through dangerous passes. And slowly, without ceremony, the idea of Roman protection begins to fade, replaced by something more immediate, more personal, loyalty not to an empire, but to a city, to a family, to the soil beneath their feet. The governor sits in his chamber late at night, reviewing ledgers by lamplight, the wax beginning to drip down the side of the candle. He reads the names of soldiers who died years ago, still listed as active. He sees payments recorded for supplies never delivered. He wonders if he has saved his province or betrayed his oath. He does not write to Rome. He knows there will be no answer. Instead, he whispers to himself, "I did what was necessary," and extinguishes the flame. Outside, the wind moves through the trees, carrying the scent of jasmine and dust. Somewhere, a child laughs. The world continues, but something has shifted, quietly forever. Far to the west, in the rolling hills of Gaul, where vineyards climb gentle slopes and rivers cut through green valleys, a road once maintained by imperial engineers begins to crumble. Rain has washed away the foundation in one stretch, leaving a deep gully where wagons can no longer pass without breaking axles. Travelers must detour through forest paths, risking bandits, wild animals, and broken wheels. A local magistrate petitions Rome for repairs, sending a detailed report with sketches of the damage, a list of materials needed, and a request for laborers. He seals it with wax, entrusts it to a courier, and waits. Weeks pass, then months. No reply comes. The parchment sits unanswered in some clerk's office in the capital. Buried beneath newer concerns, an emperor murdered in his sleep, another fleet delayed in Sicily, riots in the grain market. Eventually, the magistrate gathers the villagers himself. They bring shovels, wheelbarrows, stones from nearby fields. Without tools, without training, they patch the road as best they can, and unstable but passable. It holds for a season. Then another storm hits. The earth gives way again. It's time no one repairs it. Merchants find other routes. Families stop visiting distant kin. A town that once thrived on trade grows quieter, smaller, more inward. Children grow up never knowing the straight paved road that once connected them to the wider world. When an old man tells them stories of how soldiers marched along it, how messengers rode day and night beneath the emperor's seal, they listen politely, as if to a myth. The road becomes a ruin, then a memory, then nothing at all, just a faint trace in the earth, visible only from high ground, like a scar healing over. In North Africa, where the sun burns white over endless fields of wheat and the air shimmers above the dry earth, a different kind of fracture appears, not in stone, but in trust. For generations, farmers have sent their grain to Rome, knowing they will be paid in coin, or in tax relief, or in protection. But now, payments arrive late, if at all. Some years they do not come. Soldiers sent to guard the silos are underfed, underarmed, suspicious of the very people they are meant to serve. One autumn, a delegation of farmers travels to the provincial capital to demand answers. They walk for days, carrying scrolls with signatures, lists of debts owed, records of shipments sent. They wait for days outside the governor's residence, sleeping in the courtyard on thin mats, sharing bread and water, watching the guards change shifts with blank faces. When they are finally admitted, the official speaks kindly, but says nothing concrete. The treasury is strained, he explains. The emperor faces threats on every border. Your sacrifice is noted. They return home empty-handed. That winter, many decide not to plant. Why sow seed for a harvest that may be taken without payment? Why feed a city that forgets your name? The next year the granaries are half full, the year after less. Ships leave port with empty holds. In Rome, bread rations shrink. People grumble, but do not connect the dots. They do not know that far away, under a relentless sun, men once proud to feed an empire have chosen, quietly, to feed only themselves and their children. A mother in Carthage kneads dough with less flour, stretches the meal with lentils, tells her daughter, "This is enough." She does not say why. She does not need to. The truth is in the thinning soup, in the shorter nights at the marketplace, in the way neighbors now lock their gates before dark. Even in Rome itself, the heart begins to beat unevenly. The Senate still meets in the Curia, its marble benches worn smooth by centuries of use. its walls lined with statues of ancestors long turned to dust. Senators still debate, still deliver speeches on law and virtue, still vote on matters of state. But the energy has changed. Where once there was urgency, now there is ritual. Where once decisions shaped the world, now they echo into silence. Many senators hold their positions not by merit, but by birth or bribe. Others attend out of habit, reciting words they no longer believe, their eyes fixed on the mosaic floor, counting the cracks in the tiles. A young senator, newly appointed, tries to speak of reform, of restoring the roads, reinforcing the frontiers, reestablishing communication with the provinces. He speaks with passion, with hope, with the voice of someone who still believes in the idea of Rome. He is met with polite nods, then silence. Later, an elder pulls him aside and says, "Do not waste your breath. The machine runs on its own now. We are merely ghosts keeping watch." That night, a young man walks through the forum, lit only by moonlight and the faint glow of temple fires. He places his hand on the column of a ruined temple, feels the cold stone beneath his fingers, the roughness of weathered marble, and wonders if anyone will remember what this place once was. He thinks of the laws carved here, the treaties signed, the crowds that once gathered to hear Cicero speak. Now, only bats stir in the arches. A cat moves silently between statues. The wind carries dust across the paving stones. He stays there for a long time, not speaking, not moving, until his legs grow stiff and the sky begins to lighten. When he leaves, he does not look back, and still, life continues. A baker wakes before dawn to light his oven, the flames catching slowly in the damp wood. A mother rocks her child to sleep, humming a lullaby older than the empire, her voice soft, rhythmic, eternal. Scribe copies a letter not official, not urgent, but personal, filled with news of health, weather, love. These moments do not vanish. They persist, even as the framework around them weakens. But slowly, imperceptibly, the sense of belonging to something larger begins to dissolve. People no longer look to Rome for answers. They solve problems themselves. They rely on neighbors, not laws. They build walls around their towns, not because they fear invasion tomorrow, but because they no longer trust that help will come if it does. A merchant in Leptis Magnus stops using Roman coins and begins trading in gold by weight because he no longer trusts the value stamped upon it. A schoolteacher in Athens stops teaching Latin, focusing instead on Greek, the language of his ancestors, the one his students will actually use. A legionary stationed in Pannonia marries a local woman, learns her language, swears loyalty not to the emperor, but to the land where his children will be born, where he will grow old, where he will be buried. These are not acts of defiance. They are not rebellions carved into stone, nor declarations shouted from city walls. There is something far quieter, far more human, small choices made in dimly lit rooms, at dusty borders, in moments of exhaustion and necessity. A farmer decides to keep his grain instead of sending it south. A governor arms men who were once called enemies. A teacher stops speaking Latin because no one needs it anymore. A soldier removes his imperial insignia and places it in a wooden chest beneath his bed. It's not out of hatred, but because the man who receives his loyalty now lives beside him, not in a distant palace. These decisions are not dramatic. They do not come with speeches or fanfare, but they carry within them the quiet force of truth, the recognition that the world has changed, even if no one has announced it. And in their accumulation, across provinces, across decades, across thousands of individual lives, they form the true beginning of the end. Not a fall marked by fire and thunder, not a single day of collapse, but a long, slow release, a civilization letting go of itself, not all at once, but piece by piece, like a ship that continues to float long after its hull has begun to take on water. The empire does not shatter, it unravels. Thread by thread, connection by connection, until one day, people wake to find that the world they knew has simply changed. The roads are quieter now, no longer echoing with the steady march of legionaries or the rumble of supply wagons. Dust gathers in the grooves where wheels once passed. The letters don't come, no replies from Rome, no decrees, no news. Families stop waiting, they stop writing. The soldiers wear different armor, forged locally, shaped by hands that no longer follow imperial design. Their shields bear new symbols, animals, stars, tribal marks, because the eagle feels like a memory, not a reality. The taxes are still collected, but by local leaders, by chieftains, by men who answer to their own communities, not to a distant emperor whose name few can even recall. And no one remembers exactly when it happened, only that it did. There was no final battle, no last decree, no official end. Just a gradual fading, like twilight deepening into night, like a song that ends not with a final note, but with silence. One generation grows up hearing stories of Rome as if they were myths. The next doesn't hear them at all. It's a great machine of governance, law, trade. An order does not break down in a single moment. It simply stops being maintained, like a garden left untended, where weeds slowly reclaim the paths and trees grow through the floors of abandoned homes. Because empires are not held together by armies alone, nor by walls, nor by laws written on bronze tablets and set into marble. They are held together by something far more fragile: belief, a shared conviction that the system works, that justice will be served, that protection will arrive when needed, tomorrow will resemble today. They depend on the quiet trust that distance does not mean abandonment, that a letter sent from Britannia will be read in Rome, that a tax paid in Egypt will bring safety in return, that the name of Caesar still means something to a soldier standing watch under foreign stars. And when that belief begins to fade, when people stop expecting replies, stop believing in promises, stop teaching their children the old ways, the center loses its power. Not because it is overthrown, but because it is no longer imagined. When no one looks to Rome for answers anymore, Rome ceases to be the center. It becomes just another city, beautiful but distant, speaking a language fewer understand, clinging to titles that no one beyond its walls still honors. And still, life goes on. People love, grieve, plant seeds, sing songs, bury their dead. But they do so in smaller circles now, closer to home, more focused on the immediate, the tangible, the near. The vast dream of unity of a world bound by law and road and language begins to dissolve, with resistance but with indifference. We are walking through this moment not to mourn, not to assign blame, not to point fingers at emperors or generals or invaders. We are here to witness the quiet power of letting go, to see how even the greatest structures ever built by human hands are, at their core, made of something invisible. Not stone, not steel, not gold, but trust. Trust that others will uphold their roles, that systems will endure, that meaning will be passed from one generation to the next. And we see, too, how easily that trust can slip away, not in a storm, but in 1,000 small silences. An unanswered letter, a road left unrepaired, a child taught a new tongue, while the old one fades into forgetfulness. It slips away like sand through open fingers, grain by grain, until only the shape remains, the shadow of what once was, etched into the earth, into language, into memory. And even then, even in absence, there is beauty. It's because what was real never vanishes entirely, it becomes part of the soil. It lingers in the way we build our cities, in the laws we write, in the stories we tell at night to help us sleep. Rome did not die, it changed. And in that change it became something quieter, softer, deeper, like a river that no longer runs in one great current, but spreads into streams that nourish the land long after the source has been forgotten. When a great order begins to dissolve, it does not vanish overnight. Its end is not marked by fire or thunder, but by silence, the kind that grows in the spaces where once there was movement, where messages traveled, where systems turned with quiet precision. Indeed, yet even as the old world recedes, life does not stop. It adjusts. It bends. It finds new rhythms, new ways of holding itself together. The empire may have been vast, its reach stretching across deserts, seas, and mountains, but the people who lived within it were not waiting for collapse. They were living, loving, working, dreaming. And so, when the roads grew quieter, when the letters ceased arriving, when the coins lost their value, they did not despair. They adapted. Slowly, quietly, without fanfare, they began to shape a new world from the fragments of the old one, built not on imperial command, but on proximity, necessity, and the enduring need to belong to something real, something near. In the western provinces, where Latin had once echoed in schools, marketplaces, and military camps, a subtle transformation took place, not in laws or decrees, but in speech, in the way children learned to speak, in the way elders listened and slowly stopped correcting them. A boy in Gaul recites his lessons in careful Latin, tracing letters on a wax tablet with a stylus worn smooth by generations of students. But when he returns home, he answers his mother in a language that is neither fully Roman nor fully native, but something in between, a softening of consonants, a blending of grammar, a rhythm shaped by the land itself. His grandmother frowns, murmuring that's not how we used to speak, but she does not scold him. She knows the world has changed. The teachers still try to preserve the old tongue, copying texts from Rome, reciting Virgil by candlelight, but fewer students attend. The books remain scrolls stored in wooden cabinets. Manuscripts pass from hand to hand, but the meaning within them begins to fade like footprints in dry soil after rain. And slowly, without anyone declaring it, the voice of Rome grows quieter in the streets, replaced by a chorus of emerging voices, each shaped by memory, soil, and survival. Far to the east, in cities like Antioch, Alexandria, and Ephesus, where Greek had always mingled with Latin, the shift was different, but no less profound. Scholars still gathered in libraries lit by oil lamps, still debated philosophy and astronomy beneath vaulted ceilings painted with constellations. But their focus began to turn inward, away from imperial concerns, toward questions of spirit, of ethics, of the soul. The old gods Zeus, Athena, Apollo still stood in temples, their statues polished, their altars adorned with flowers, but fewer candles burned before them. Instead, people gathered in small houses, in courtyards and hidden rooms, to listen to stories of a man who walked among the poor, who spoke of love and mercy, who promised life beyond death. These gatherings were not loud. They did not tear down temples or burn books. They simply existed quietly, persistently, like roots growing beneath stone, like water seeping through cracks. A physician in Ephesus, once dedicated to the healing god Asclepius, now prays not to statues, but in silence,
asking for strength to help his patients.
He still uses the same tools, the same remedies, but his heart leans toward a different truth. And when he writes his notes, he signs them not with an invocation to Apollo, but with a small cross drawn in the margin. No law commands this change. No emperor decrees it. It simply spreads like warmth through a room, like dawn across a valley, carried not by armies, but by whispered sermons, shared meals, acts of kindness in times of plague. In the countryside, where farmers have always measured time by seasons rather than emperors, life continued much as it had for generations, but with new patterns woven into the old. Where once they sent grain to Rome in exchange for coin, they now kept more for themselves. Traded locally, paid debts in livestock or labor. The great villas of the wealthy, once surrounded by bustling estates, began to shrink. Some were abandoned altogether, their marble columns left to tilt under ivy, their mosaics cracked by frost and tree roots. Others were repurposed, turned into refuges, workshops, even small churches. A former estate manager, once responsible for sending shipments to Ostia, now oversees a community garden where families grow vegetables together. He no longer wears the purple stripe of office, but a simple tunic, patched at the elbow. When asked about the old days, he says only, "We fed Rome. Now we feed each other." And though his words carry no grandeur, they hold a quiet truth. The center has shifted. Power is no longer in distant palaces, but in hands that plant, build, heal, and care. The land still gives, but now it serves those who live upon it, not a city thousands of miles away. Even along the frontiers, where once the legions stood as unbreakable walls, the world moved in new directions. Tribes that had once clashed with Rome now settled into the rhythm of coexistence. Some adopted Roman customs, building homes with courtyards, using coins, following written laws. Others preserved their own ways, but with a new stability, no longer driven by conflict, but by the need to survive, to raise children in peace. A chieftain in Pannonia holds council not in a war tent, but in a modest hall built of timber and stone, where elders debate crop rotation, water rights, and disputes between families. He keeps a Roman sword mounted on the wall, a gift from a former Isla, but he does not wear it. His son plays nearby, shaping clay into animals, unaware that his grandfather once fought against Rome. The border that once divided enemy from citizen has blurred. Not because of treaties, but because people stopped believing in the line. Soldiers who once guarded it now farm the land. Merchants who once feared crossing it now travel freely, carrying salt, cloth, and honey from village to village. The idea of inside and outside the empire fades, not with resistance, but with indifference, like a fence left to rot, till one day no one remembers why it was built. And yet, amidst all this change, fragments of the old world endured, not as power, but as memory, as habit, as beauty. In a monastery perched on a hill in southern Gaul, a monk copies a manuscript of Virgil by candlelight, his quill moving slowly across parchment. He does not understand all the lines, but he preserves them anyway, line by line, page by page, because someone once told him they were important. The ink stains his fingers. The wax drips down the side of the candle. Outside, the wind moves through olive trees. He does not know that centuries later someone will read these pages and say, "This is how they spoke. This is what they valued." In North Africa, a mosaic floor lies half buried beneath dust and rubble, its colors still vivida, ships sailing toward a golden sun, perhaps symbolizing hope, perhaps just decoration. A child playing nearby kicks up dirt, revealing a corner of the image. He stops, stares, then runs off to find his friends. He does not know what it means. But the image remains waiting. In Rome itself, the aqueducts still stand, though dry. Birds nest in their arches. Ivy climbs their pillars. Every morning without fail, the baker lights his oven, the mother feeds her child. The old man walks to the fountain that no longer flows, just to sit and remember. Trade, too, continue but differently. The great networks that once carried silk from China, spices from India, wine from Gaul, and grain from Egypt no longer moved along imperial routes guarded by soldiers and regulated by tax collectors. Instead, smaller caravans formed, traveling shorter distances, guided by local knowledge rather than imperial maps. A merchant in Carthage no longer ships goods to Ostia, but trades directly with nearby towns, bartering olive oil for wool, salt for pottery. He no longer uses Roman coins, whose value fluctuates unpredictably, but weighs gold and silver himself, trusting his own scales more than any mint. The roads are less traveled, but not forgotten. Farmers use them as paths between fields. Shepherds drive flocks along them in spring. Sometimes, late at night, a traveler walks alone beneath the stars, following the ancient stones not because they lead to Rome, but because they lead somewhere unaware away from isolation. The economy did not disappear. It shrank, localized, became more personal. Value was no longer abstract, printed on metal, but tangible, measured in bread, in cloth, in shelter offered to a stranger on a cold night. Religion, too, wove itself into the fabric of this new world. Temples to Jupiter, Mars, and Venus still stood in many towns, their steps worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, but fewer people climbed them. Some were converted into churches, their altars repurposed, their frescoes painted over with images of Christ, the Virgin, and the saints. Others were left untouched, not destroyed, but simply unused. A farmer might leave a small offering at an old shrine, not because he believes in the god, but because his father did, and his father before him, a gesture of respect, of continuity, of not forgetting. In the hills of Hispania, a hermit lives in a cave once sacred to a local deity, praying not to the old gods but in silence, seeking closeness to a divine presence he cannot name. Pilgrims begin to walk new paths, not to Rome, but to holy sites emerging in Gaul and Egypt. In Syria, places where miracles are said to have happened, where healing waters flow, where visions are seen in dreams. Faith did not die with the empire. It changed form, becoming more intimate, more personal, less tied to state power, and more rooted in individual longing. Education, once a path to civic duty and imperial service, also transformed. Schools still existed, but their purpose shifted. Boys no longer studied rhetoric to become senators or governors, but learned reading, writing, and arithmetic to manage family lands, keep accounts, or serve in local councils. Monasteries became centers of learning, where where monks copied not only religious texts, but also fragments of Roman law, medical treatises, and philosophical works, preserving them not for glory, but out of reverence for knowledge itself. A young novice in a remote scriptorium asks his elder, "Why do we copy these old books if no one reads them?" The elder smiles and says, "Because someone, someday, might need them." And so, page by page, century by century, the past is saved and not by emperors, but by quiet hands in candlelit rooms. By those who believe that some things are worth keeping, even if the world has moved on. Art and architecture followed the same quiet evolution. The grand monuments, triumphal arches, colossal statues, elaborate baths were no longer built. There was no money, no labor, no belief in eternal glory, but beauty did not vanish, simply changed scale. Mosaics were still made, but in small chapels, not public forums. Crosses were carved into wood with care. Songs were composed not for emperors, but for saints, for harvests, for children. A potter in Thrace shapes a jug with the same skill his ancestors used centuries before, unaware that archaeologists will one day marvel at the symmetry of his work. A woman in Britannia embroiders a cloak with patterns that blend Roman motifs and Celtic knotsa. Silent testament to a world in motion, where identities merge not through conquest, but through time. The great aesthetic of unity gave way to 1,000 local expressions, each imperfect, each alive, each true. And so the world moved not forward, not backward, but sideways. Like a river finding new channels when the main bed dries, the empire did not fall. It dissolved, broke apart into smaller worlds, each turning around its own sun. Kings rose in places where governors once ruled. Bishops held influence once reserved for magistrates. Families looked to local leaders, not distant capitals. And yet in all of it, there was no single moment of rupture. No one woke up and said, "Today Rome is gone." It simply became something else smaller, quieter, closer to the earth. Because history does not move in straight lines. It breathes, it bends, it retreats, and returns in unexpected ways. And sometimes, the most powerful changes are the ones no one sees coming, not in battles, not in coronations, but in the quiet choices of ordinary people who, simply by living, carry the world into tomorrow. When the world changes around you, but your heart still remembers how it once was, a quiet conflict begins, not in the streets, not in war, but within. It lives in the pause before a man calls himself by a new name. In the hesitation of a mother teaching her child a language she was told would last forever, in the silence of a priest who no longer knows which God listens. These are not dramatic moments. They do not echo through history books, but they carry weight, personal, unseen. A soldier who once swore loyalty to Rome now looks at his son playing in the dust and wonders what oaths matter more than survival. A scribe copies an old law code by candlelight and stops halfway, asking himself who will enforce this, who still believes in it. And yet he continues. Not because it must be done, but because doing it feels like holding on to something real in a world that is slipping away. His hand moves across the parchment not out of duty, but out of love for order, for meaning. For the idea that even if no one reads these words tomorrow, someone might need them someday. He does not know when that day will come. He only knows that to stop writing would feel like surrender. So he dips the quill again, wipes the ink from his fingers, and keeps going, line after line. As the wax drips slowly down the side of the candle and the wind moves through the cracks in the shutters like a forgotten memory, in a village in southern Gaul, an elder stands at the edge of a field where the first stones of a small church are being laid. He watches as younger men shape timber into arches, following designs brought by a traveling monk whose cloak is worn thin at the shoulders, whose hands are calloused from years of walking. The elder remembers when this same spot held a temple to Mercury, where merchants left coins for good fortune, where festivals were held under garlands of ivy and wine flowed freely in honor of commerce and travel. He never truly believed in the god, but he respected the ritual, the rhythm it gave to life, the way it marked the turning of seasons, the arrival of caravans, the beginning of journeys. Now that temple lies in ruins, its columns broken, its altar cracked by frost, its roof long since collapsed under the weight of snow and time. No one destroyed it. It was simply forgotten. As he stands there, A boy runs past, carrying a bucket of water, shouting in a dialect that blends Latin and the old tongue, his voice rising and falling in a rhythm unfamiliar to the elder's ears. The elder does not understand every word. He feels for a moment like a stranger in his own homa, man standing between two worlds, belonging fully to neither.
Oh.
He does not wish to return to the past. But he mourns quietly, not for gods or emperors, not for marble or law, but for continuity. For the comfort of knowing exactly who you are, where you belong, what your place means. That night, he sits on a low stool outside his door, watching the stars appear one by one, and whispers the names of his ancestors into the dark. No one hears him. But the act itself is resistance, not against the new, but against forgetting. Far to the east, in a monastery near Antioch built into the side of a hill where olive trees cling to rocky soil, a young monk kneels before a manuscript he cannot read. It is written in classical Greek, the language of philosophers, of imperial decrees, of scholars who once filled libraries with wisdom so vast it was said no man could master it all. He knows enough to recognize names, Plato, Aristotle, Galon, but the meaning slips through his fingers like sand, elusive, fragmented. Around him, others copy texts they barely understand, preserving them out of devotion, not knowledge. Their quills scratching softly in the dim light, their breath visible in the cold morning air. One brother says, "We keep them so that someday someone wiser than us may read them." The young monk nods, but inside he wrestles with doubt. Is he serving God by copying words he cannot comprehend? Or is he clinging to a world that no longer exists, honoring letters that have lost their power? That night, he sits alone in the scriptorium, the candle flickering, casting long shadows on the stone walls, and opens a simpler book of gospel in the common tongue, its pages worn smooth by countless hands. He reads slowly aloud, feeling the words settle in his chest, like warmth after cold, closes the ancient manuscript gently, places it on the shelf with reverence and whispers, "I am sorry I could not understand you." Then he picks up the other book and begins to copy it instead. His hand trembles slightly. This is not rebellion. 'Tis loyalty to truth, to clarity, to the need to mean something to someone, to speak to hearts rather than impress minds. And in that choice, small as it seems, he chooses not the past, but the present, the living word over the preserved one. A woman in North Africa faces a different kind of choice, one that lives not in philosophy, but in flesh and blood, in family, in identity. Once married to a Roman official, a man who wore the toga praetexta with pride and spoke of civitas and dignitas as if they were sacred. She is now widowed and living in a town where soldiers no longer patrol, where the aqueduct is run dry, where children play among the ruins of a forum that once echoed with debate. Her home is still standing, its courtyard shaded by a fig tree planted by her husband, its walls lined with shelves of books and scrolls wrapped in linen and tied with string. But the world outside has changed. The roads are unsafe. The markets are smaller, quieter, filled with faces she does not recognize. Her neighbors speak less Latin, more of the local tongue, their voices rising in a melody that feels both foreign and familiar. Her daughter wishes to marry a man from a nearby tribe, one kind, hard-working, respectful, who brings gifts of honey and wool, who treats her with gentleness. But he is not Roman. He does not wear the toga. He does not speak the language fluently. The woman hesitates. She thinks of her father, who served in the Senate, who believed in law, in order, in civilization as a divine gift. She thinks of the pride she once felt, saying, "I am Roman," of the way it made her stand taller, walk straighter, believe she belonged to something eternal. But as she watches her daughter laugh with the young man under the olive tree, her face lit with joy, she feels something shift, not loss, but release, not defeat, but acceptance. That night, she burns a single scrawl her husband's commissioned from Rome. Watching, the flames consume the ink, the seal, the words that once defined her life. She does not weep. She walks into the garden barefoot on cool earth and breathes deeply, listening to the crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves. The next morning, she gives her blessing. Her identity does not vanish. It simply becomes something softer, wider, deeper, like a river that no longer flows in one channel, but spreads into the land. In Britannia, a former centurion lives in a modest house near the remains of Hadrian's Wall, where the wind sweeps endlessly across misty hills and stone forts cling to the edge of the known world. His armor hangs on the wall, polished but unused, the bronze gleaming faintly in the lamplight. His sword rests above the hearth, a relic, not a tool. He wakes before dawn, tends his goats, draws water from the well, speaks to his neighbors in a mix of Latin and the local Celtic speech, his accent softened by decades of isolation. Children call him grandfather, though he has none of his own. Once he commanded a century of men, marched across provinces, defended an empire that stretched from sea to sea. Now he mediates disputes between farmers, helps deliver lambs in spring, tells stories by firelight about distant cities and golden palaces. But inside, there is a quiet tension, a sense that he was trained for one world, but now lives in another. One evening, a traveler asks if he misses Rome. He stares into the flames for a long time before answering, "I miss the idea of it, the belief that things made sense." He does not say more. But that night, he writes a letter to no one, listing the names of his men, their ranks, their deeds. The battles they fought, the roads they walked, he does not send it. He folds it carefully, presses it flat, and places it beneath the floorboards, covering it with dirt and a loose stone. It is not pride, it is memory. And memory, he knows, is its own kind of courage, the refusal to let a life lived fade into nothing. Elsewhere, a teacher in Athens closes the door of the schoolroom for the last time. For 30 years, he has taught rhetoric, grammar, philosophy, the tools of Roman citizenship, the foundation of public life. He has shaped minds, inspired debates, guided boys toward lives of reason and virtue. But fewer boys come each year. Their parents say they need them in the fields, or that the lessons are no longer useful, that no city sends for scholars anymore. The final day, he stands before an empty bench, chalk in hand, and recites a passage from Cicero on justice, on the dignity of law, on the responsibility of the wise to guide the many. His voice fills the room, strong and clear, though no one listens. When he finishes, he wipes the board slowly, then gathers his books. Some he gives away. Others he packs into a wooden chest, wrapping them in cloth to protect them from damp. One student, a boy of 10, runs in late, breathless, saying, "I came as fast as I could." The teacher smiles, places a hand on his shoulder, and says, "You are here now." That is enough. He does not teach again. But years later, that boy will tell his own children about the old man who spoke of honor, of reason, of a world built on words. And though the school is gone, the lesson remains passed, not through institutions, but through memory, through story, through the quiet persistence of one voice carried forward by another. In a small port town in Sicily, a shipbuilder faces a crisis of purpose deeper than hunger or fear. For generations, his family has constructed vessels for the Imperial Navy, strong, swift, designed to carry soldiers, grain, messages across the Mediterranean. The smell of tar and pine resin still clings to his clothes. His hands bear the scars of decades shaping wood into form. But no orders have come in years. The docks are quiet. The warehouses stand empty. His sons ask if they should build fishing boats instead, simple crafts to feed families. He resists at first. To make a warship is to serve Rome. To make a fishing boat is to admit that the age of empires is over, that greatness has given way to necessity. But one morning, he walks to the shore and watches an old fisherman mend his net, his hands slow but sure, his eyes fixed on the pattern of knots. The sea is calm, golden in the sunrise, reflecting the sky like polished metal. The shipbuilder sits beside him. They do not speak. After a while, he says, "Teach me." The fisherman nods. And so, the man who once shaped ships for conquest now learns to weave nets for sustenance. His pride does not break. It bends. And in that bending, there is dignity, not in service to an empire, but to life itself, to the quiet work of feeding others, of surviving, of continuing. A bishop in Ravenna carries a burden few can see. Once he was a scholar in Rome, fluent in law, theology, and politics, able to quote scripture and imperial decree with equal ease. Now he leads a shrinking congregation in a city that was once a refuge, now feels like an island adrift. Emperors come and go, some Christian, some not, all unstable, some cruel, others weak. He is asked to swear loyalty to one after another, to bless their reigns, to pray for their victories. But he sees their cruelty, their greed, their fleeting power. Yet if he refuses, his people may suffer. If he speaks too boldly, he may be exiled, or worse. So he walks a narrow path, speaking carefully, praying openly, acting with compassion behind closed doors. At night, he kneels in his chamber, the oil lamp low, and asks not for strength, but for wisdom, to know when to speak, when to remain silent, when to resist, when to endure. His courage is not in defiance, but in persistence, and showing up, day after day, to feed the hungry, heal the sick, bury the dead, while the world trembles around him. He does not dream of changing history. He dreams only of being faithful to his vows, to his people, to the quiet light within. In Hispania, a farmer discovers a buried statue of Jupiter while plowing his field. The head is cracked, the lightning bolt in its hand broken, the marble stained with centuries of soil. He pulls it from the earth, wipes the mud from its face with his sleeve, and stares at it for a long time. He does not believe in the old gods. His wife prays to Christ. His children sing hymns. But still, the statue feels familiar, like a grandfather whose voice has faded, but whose presence lingers in the home. He does not destroy it. He does not revere it. Instead, he places it at the edge of his orchard, where it stands among the trees, slowly being claimed by moss and ivy. When neighbors ask why he didn't smash it, he says it kept watch once. Let it rest with dignity. There is no grand statement in this act. It's only respect for what was, for what passed, for the quiet dignity of endings. He waters his trees, harvests his olives, and never looks back. But sometimes at dusk, he pauses near the statue, places a hand on its cold shoulder, and whispers, "Thank you for guarding us while you could." And so, across the fading empire, such moments unfold, not with fanfare, but in silence. A widow chooses peace over pride. A soldier finds purpose in tending goats. A teacher passes on words no one demands. A builder trades glory for bread. These are not heroes in the old sense. They do not wear crowns or win battles. But they possess a different kind of strength, a courage to let go, to adapt, to continue without certainty, to care for others even when the world no longer makes sense. Their conflicts are not loud. Their victories are not recorded. But in their quiet choices, humanity endures. Because true courage is not always found in standing tall against the storm, but in kneeling to plant a seed when everything around you feels like ruin. There are moments in history that look like nothing at all, is just another night, another breath, another step taken without ceremony, and yet, in hindsight, they carry the weight of beginnings. Not every turning point arrives with thunder. Some slip in like moonlight through a half-opened shutter, silent, soft, unnoticed, until much later, when the world has already changed. This is one such moment, not on a battlefield, not in a palace, not before a crowd, but in a small room lit by a single oil lamp, where a man sits alone, his hands resting on a wooden table, worn smooth by decades of use, his fingers tracing the grooves left by old ink spills and knife cuts. The wax seal on the letter he has just finished writing has cooled, hardened into a deep red circle bearing the imprint of his ring-and eagle clutching an olive branch, a symbol of peace once believed eternal. He reads it again, slowly, feeling each sentence settle in his chest like stones placed one by one into a well. It is addressed to no one he truly expects to answer, and still, he wrote it as, if the act itself could clarify what had been unclear for years. Outside, the wind moves through olive trees, their leaves whispering against the wall, and a dog barks once, far away, then falls silent. The hour is late. The world sleeps, but inside something has shifted, not because of what was said, but because of what was finally admitted. I can no longer serve two masters. For the first time, he named the conflict within him, the loyalty to a fading empire, warring with the need to protect those beside him. In naming it, he began to let go. In the hills of northern Gaul, A woman stands at the edge of a forest just after dusk, wrapped in a woolen shawl against the autumn chill. Her breath rising in pale clouds that vanish into the darkening air. She has walked here alone, following a path worn by deer and shepherds, carrying a small bundle wrapped in linen, tied with strings so tightly her fingers ache from untying it. Her face is calm, but her breath comes shallow, uneven, as though she is holding back tears or relief.
Ow.
Inside the bundle is a child's tunic, stained with mud and food, folded with care. A wooden toy horse, its paint chipped, one leg broken. A lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon, cut the night before soldiers came to the village. These were her son's things, the ones she could not bear to leave behind when she fled months ago. The ones she carried across rivers and through forests, hidden beneath her cloak like sacred relics. Now she kneels in the damp earth, the soil cool beneath her knees, and digs a shallow hole beneath an ancient oak whose roots twist like serpents into the ground. She places the bundle inside with deliberate slowness, arranging each item as if laying a body to rest. She does not speak. She does not pray to any god. She only covers it gently with soil, presses her palm flat against the earth, and stays there for a long time, listening to the silence, feeling the weight of letting go. She is not Roman. She is not barbarian. She is simply a mother who chose survival over loyalty, movement over memory. And in this quiet burial not of a body, but of a past she lets go, of the last thread tying her to the life she once knew. When she rises, her legs stiff from kneeling, she does not look back. The forest absorbs her footsteps. Somewhere ahead a new village waits, where no one asks her name or origin. And for the first time in years, she feels free, not because she has escaped danger, but because she has stopped running from herself. Far to the east, in a monastery near the ruins of Ephesus, built into the side of a hill, where olive trees cling to rocky soil and goats. Climb paths too steep for men. An elderly monk sits awake through the night, unable to sleep. The others have gone to their cells, the candles extinguished, the corridors dark and still. The silence broken only by the occasional rustle of a mouse beneath the floorboards. But he remains in the scriptorium, a small room lined with shelves of manuscripts wrapped in cloth and tied with string, their titles written in fading ink. His hands rest on an open book, a copy of Augustine's City of God, which he has read 100 times. Its pages softened by touch, its margins filled with notes in his own hand. Tonight he traces a line with his finger, reading aloud in a voice barely above a whisper. 2 cities have been formed by 2 loves, the earthly by the love of self, even to the contempt of God, the heavenly by the love of God, even to the contempt of self. He closes his eyes. For decades, he believed he was building the heavenly city, copying texts, teaching novices, praying through the hours, preserving knowledge as if it were divine. But now he wonders if he has only been preserving the earthly one, the empire's language. Its logic, its need for order, its obsession with permanence. He thinks of the world outside, villages burning, roads unsafe, families scattered, children orphaned by wars no one remembers starting. And he asks himself, for the first time, am I serving God or am I serving memory? At dawn, he closes the book, walks to the garden, and begins to dig. Not a grave, a foundation. By midday, others join him. They gather stones, timber, clay. They are not building a library. They're building a shelter for travelers, for widows, for the sick. No one declares it a miracle, but it is. Because for the first time, faith is no longer written. It is lived. In Ravenna, a bishop kneels in a small chapel beneath a dome painted with stars and angels. Their faces serene, their hands raised in blessing, their robes flowing in colors that have not faded despite the years. Before him, on a simple altar of unpolished stone, lies a letter from the emperor command sealed in purple wax, carried by a messenger who arrived at dawn, exhausted, his boots covered in dust. The order is clear. Condemn a rival bishop, declare him a heretic, rally the people against him. Penance is implied. Sin and gain favor, refuse and risk exile, perhaps worse. The bishop does not hesitate outwardly. His face is calm, his posture still, his hands folded in prayer. But inside, a storm rages. He knows the accused man is not a heretic, only a man who speaks truth differently, who questions authority not out of rebellion, but conscience. He knows the emperor seeks not justice, but control. And he knows that silence, too, is a choice, one that may save his flock from violence or betray his soul. That night, by lamplight, he writes 2 letters. One, official, signed with his seal, agrees to the condemnation. The other, private, is sent secretly through a trusted deacon to the exiled bishop. Do not lose heart. What you teach is true. I cannot say so aloud, but I believe it, and I will remember you in my prayers. He sends both, one to protect his people from suffering, the other to preserve his integrity. No one sees him write them. No one witnesses the trembling in his hands, the way he stops twice to wipe his eyes. But in that duality and the tension between duty and conscience, he finds a new kind of courage. Not the courage to defy,
Dad.
but the courage to endure with honesty. To serve 2 truths when only one is allowed. To live in the shadow without losing the light. On a ship drifting slowly along the Italian coast beneath a sky thick with stars, their reflections shimmering on the water like scattered silver, a former soldier sits on the deck, his back against the mast, wrapped in a rough woolen cloak. He is not traveling to war. He is not returning home. He does not know where he is going. For years he served in the Imperial Navy, guarding trade routes, enforcing taxes. Believing in order, in discipline, in the righteousness of Rome's reach. But after the last battle, when he watched boys younger than his own son drown in the cold sea, their armor dragging them down, when he saw commanders abandon their men to save themselves, he laid down his sword and walked away. No one stopped him. No one noticed. Now he works as a deckhand, earning bread and shelter, speaking little, moving slowly, his face weathered by sun and salt. This night, as the vessel glides over dark water, the sound of waves against wood a steady rhythm. He takes out a small wooden tablet and begins to carve. Not a weapon, not a shield. A bird, its wings spread wide, its beak open, as if singing. He does not know why. He only knows that for the first time in decades, he is not thinking of commands, of ranks, of victory. He is thinking of flight, of release, of beauty. When he finishes, he does not keep it. He wraps it in cloth, walks to the rail, and drops it into the sea. It floats for a moment, bobbing in the wake, then sinks. No one sees it. But in that gesture, small, silent, unseen, is as if he has buried a lifetime of obedience and given birth to something new, the right to create, not destroy, to honor life, not take it. In a village near the Danube, an elder gathers the leaders at dusk in a circle around a fire fed with dry branches and olive pits. No drums, no banners, no oaths sworn. They are not declaring war. They are making a quieter decision to stop sending grain to Rome. For generations, they have done it because it was law. Because soldiers came to collect it, because they believed in the empire's promise of protection. But the soldiers haven't come in years. The roads are unsafe. The granaries are empty. The children go hungry. So tonight, under a sky streaked with thin clouds catching the last light of day, the elder speaks softly, his voice low but clear. We will feed our own first. If there is more, we will trade. But no more will be taken from us while we starve. No one shouts. No one argues. They nod, one by one, their faces lit by flickering flames, and when the fire dies down, they return to their homes. The next morning, when a tax collector arrives, thin, weary, bearing a scroll and a satchel of coins meant to pay for the harvest, he is welcomed, offered food, water, a place to rest. But when he asks for the grain, the villagers say only, "There is none to give." He does not resist, eats, rests, and leaves without the cargo. It is not rebellion, it is refusal. And in that refusal, spoken not in anger but in weariness, the empire loses another thread, one that will not be rewoven. In Alexandria, a scholar sits in the last surviving chamber of what was once the great library, now reduced to a few rooms guarded by monks and forgotten by the world. Before him lies a manuscript, perhaps the last copy of a lost work by Hypatia, its ink fading, its edges brittle, held together by linen tape. He has spent years restoring it, word by word, symbol by symbol, matching gaps with fragments found in monasteries across the East. Tonight he finishes. He runs his fingers over the final page, feeling the texture of papyrus, the slight ridge of ink, the warmth of the lamp on his skin. Then he does something unexpected. He begins to recite it aloud, not in Greek, not in formal cadence, but in Coptic, the language of the people, slow and clear, shaping each syllable with care. A young apprentice listens, wide-eyed, taking notes. When he asks why, the scholar says, "Knowledge should not die in silence. If it cannot live in books, let it live in voices." The next day, he teaches it to others. They pass it on, not as doctrine, not as power, but as story, as wisdom. And though the original text will one day crumble to dust, the ideas survive, carried forward, not by parchment, but by memory, by breath, by the quiet determination of one man who believed that truth belongs to everyone, not just the learned. In a farmhouse in Hispania, a father kneels beside his daughter's bed as she sleeps, feverish, breathing unevenly, her skin hot to the touch. For 3 days he has tried remedies, herbs, crushed in honey, prayers whispered at dawn, cold cloths changed hourly. Nothing helps.
Outside, the wind howls through the valley, shaking the shutters.
The roads are impassable. No physician will come. At midnight, he lights a candle, opens a small wooden box passed down from his grandfather, and takes out 2 objects: a Roman amulet bearing the image of Asclepius, healer of men, and a crude cross carved from olive wood by a local monk. He holds them both in his hands, staring at them as if they might speak, as if one could command the other to fade. He was raised to trust the old gods. His wife prays to Christ. He has never chosen. But now, choice is forced upon him. He places the amulet on the shelf. He lays the cross on his daughter's chest. He kneels, closes his eyes, and prays, not in Latin, not in formality, but in his own words. In tears, in desperation, asking not for glory, but for breath, for life. Hours later, the fever breaks. She stirs, whispers his name. He does not claim it as miracle. He does not renounce the old ways. But from that night on, he begins to attend the small gatherings in the village church. It's not because he has certainty, but because in the shadow of loss he found a voice he did not know he had. In Rome itself, an old scribe sits at his desk in a nearly empty office near the Forum, copying a census record that may never be used. Dust covers the shelves. The inkwell is low. The quill scratches softly against parchment, the only sound in the room. He knows no one will read this. The empire no longer collects such data, but he continues not for Rome, but for himself, for the rhythm of the task, for the illusion of order. At the end of the page, he adds a line not required, written in smaller script, almost hidden. And on this night, the year we no longer number clearly, I remember their names. Then he closes the ledger, blows out the lamp, and walks home through silent streets, his sandals tapping softly on stone worn smooth by centuries. As he passes the temple of Vesta, he sees a single flame still burning in the hearth. No priestess tends it. No ritual marks the hour, but it burns. He stops, watches it flicker in the wind, casting tiny shadows on the marble steps, and feels something unnameable, hope, perhaps, or continuity. He does not touch it. He does not speak. He only stands there, breathing slowly until his eyes grow heavy with emotion. And when he walks away, the flame remains, small, fragile, alive. Because turning points do not always arrive with noise. Sometimes they come in silence, in a buried bundle, a dropped carving, a whispered prayer, a shared loaf of bread. They live in the choices no one records, in the moments no historian notices, in the quiet courage of those who, instead of fighting the end, learn how to begin again. And in that beginning, humble, uncertain, tender, the future is born, not from force, but from care, not from conquest, but from compassion, not from memory alone, but from the willingness to walk forward, even when the path is not yet visible. There comes a time after every turning point, when the world grows quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because the soul needs space to breathe. After the letter has been sent, after the choice has been made, after the path has been taken, there is a pause, a long, soft exhale, where one looks back, not with regret but with clarity, This is not the moment of action, it is the moment of feeling, of remembering the weight of what was left behind. A home, a belief, a version of oneself that can never return. A farmer in Gaul walks through his field at dawn, the soil cool beneath his bare feet, and stops beside a broken column half buried in earth. He does not know who built it, or why, but he knows it once held up a roof, sheltered people, marked a boundary between inside and outside. Now it lies fallen, moss creeping over its edges, a vine winding around its waist. He places his hand on the stone, feels its cold surface, and for the first time, allows himself to grieve not for the empire, not for Rome, but for the certainty he once carried, the unshakable belief that things would continue as they had begun. That grief does not come with tears. It comes with stillness, with breath, with the slow recognition that loss is not failure, but part of living. And in that stillness, something new begins to grow, not yet, but tenderness. For what was, for what is, for what may be. In a monastery in southern Italy, an old monk sits by a window where morning light falls across a wooden table. Before him lies a small box containing letters, some written by friends long gone, others by students who vanished during the unrest, their fates unknown. He opens it slowly, carefully, as if handling something alive. One letter is from a younger brother who joined the army, full of pride and hope. The next, years later, speaks of exhaustion, of cold nights on distant frontiers, of wondering if anyone remembers his name. The final one was never sent. The monk reads it again, though he knows it by heart. Then he closes the box, runs his fingers over its worn lid, and whispers, "I remember you." He does not pray. He does not weep. He only sits there, letting the light warm his hands. Feeling the weight of absence, not as emptiness, but as presence of lives lived. Choices made, love given, even when no one saw. He understands now that memory is not just preservation. It is an act of loyalty to those who walked beside us, to those who suffered in silence, to those whose names will never appear in history books. And so, each evening, he lights a candle for someone forgotten, not because it changes the past, but because it honors it. In doing so, he learns one of the deepest lessons of all, that healing does not mean forgetting, but carrying forward with care. Far to the north, in a village near the Rhine, a woman kneads bread in the dim light of early morning, her hands moving with rhythm learned from her mother, who learned it from hers. The recipe is changed over time, less wheat, more barley, sometimes mixed with ground acorns when grain is scarce, but the motion remains the same. As she works, she thinks of her daughter, who left last spring to join a distant community rumored to have stable food and safety. She does not know if she will ever see her again. No message has come. But every day, she bakes the same loaf, cuts it the same way, sets aside a piece as if someone will sit across from her. One night a traveler arrives, weary, speaking a dialect she barely understands. She offers him food, listens as he tells of villages rebuilding, of people sharing what little they have. At some point, he mentions a young woman who helped deliver medicine during a fever outbreak, someone kind who sang while working. The name is not exact, but close enough. The woman does not cry. She only serves him more bread, pours water, and says, "Thank you for telling me." Later alone, she stands at the door, looking at the stars, and whispers her daughter's name into the dark. She does not know if she is alive, but she knows she is remembered. And in that knowing there is peace, not perfect, not complete, but real. Because sometimes, the greatest comfort is not reunion, but the quiet certainty that love outlives distance. In Ravenna, the bishop who once wrote 2 letters, one public, one secret, walks through the city at dusk, wrapped in a simple cloak, unrecognized by most. Children run past, laughing, unaware of the burden he carries. He passes the church where he once gave sermons to packed halls, now quieter, humbler. Inside, a small group gathers not for doctrine, but for company, for shared bread, for stories, for silence. He joins them, sits on a low bench, listens as an old man speaks of losing his farm, a young woman of walking for weeks to find safety. No one offers solutions, they only listen. And in that listening, something sacred happens, not worship in the old sense, but presence. Later, as he walks home, he stops beneath an olive tree and asks himself, for the first time, what did I save? Not the empire, not power, not even truth in any grand form. But perhaps dignity, perhaps compassion. Perhaps the idea that leadership is not about command, but about staying with people when everything else has failed. He does not smile, but his shoulders relax just slightly, as if releasing a weight he didn't know he carried. The lesson is clear. He did not win, but he endured. And in enduring, he served. On an island off the coast of Greece, a former scholar lives in a small stone house overlooking the sea. Once he taught philosophy in Athens, quoting Plato and Seneca, 2 rows of attentive students. Now he teaches children how to read, using whatever texts remain, fragments of plays, scraps of law, a single gospel copied by hand. He does not pretend to have answers, he only encourages questions. One afternoon a boy asks, "Why do we learn if no one listens anymore?" The old man pauses, looks out at the waves breaking against the rocks, and says, "Because someone might need these words someday, because asking matters more than knowing." The boy nods, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth in the tone. Years later, he will teach others the same way. The scholar does not live to see it, but the seed is planted. And in that exchange, fragile as it seems, lies one of the deepest truths. That education is not about preserving the past, but about preparing the future even. If that future is uncertain, even if it takes centuries to unfold, loss is real. Knowledge fades. But curiosity, once awakened, does not die easily. In North Africa, a woman tends a garden where roses grow wild among herbs and vegetables. Her husband was a Roman official, buried far from here. Her children speak a language she is still learning, that she stays, not out of obligation, but because this soil has become hers. One morning, she finds a cracked tile beneath the fig tree, part of a mosaic, its colors still faintly visible, a ship sailing toward a golden sun. She cleans it gently, places it on a shelf inside, where sunlight touches it each afternoon. She does not restore it. She does not hide it. She simply lets it be a fragment of a world that once believed in eternal journeys. And as she watches the light move across its surface, she realizes that beauty does not require permanence to matter. What was lost, the empire, the order, the certainty, is real, but so is what remains. The warmth of sun, the scent of time, the laughter of her grandchildren playing nearby. The lesson settles softly. Continuity is not found in institutions, but in moments. In hands that plant, hearts that love, eyes that still look toward the horizon, even when the map has changed. In Rome itself, an elderly scribe sits by a window where moonlight falls across an open book. He no longer writes official records. No one collects them anymore. Instead, he copies stories, myths, parables, fragments of poetry, anything that speaks of human longing, of courage, of kindness. One night, a young visitor asks why he bothers. "No one will read this," the youth says. The scribe smiles, dips his quill, and continues writing. "Maybe not now," he replies. "But someone, somewhere, might need to know that we tried, that we remembered, that we cared." The youth leaves confused.
Hey.
But years later he returns, older now, holding a child by the hand. He says, "Only I kept one of your pages? I read it when I was afraid." The scribe does not respond. He only places a hand on the boy's head and goes back to writing. In that silence, the lesson becomes clear. Legacy is not measured in monuments, but in the unseen ripples of care. We do not know who will find our words, our actions, our quiet courage. But we trust that someone will. Elsewhere, a fisherman in Sicily repairs his net by lamplight, his fingers moving slowly, deliberately. His son watches, silent, learning. The boy does not ask about the past. He does not wonder about emperors or wars. He only wants to know how to tie the knots properly. The fisherman teaches him, not with speeches, but with patience, correcting gently, repeating until the pattern is right. When the net is finished, they carry it to the shore together, let it sink into the water, and wait. No words are exchanged. But in that shared work, something is passed. Not information, but belonging. The lesson is simple, yet profound. Survival is not just about food or shelter. It is about connection. It's about showing up. It's about teaching someone how to mend what is broken, even if the sea keeps tearing it apart. And so, across the fading world, such moments unfold, not in palaces, not in chronicles, but in homes, gardens, boats, and quiet rooms. People learn that loss is not the end of meaning, but a doorway to deeper understanding. They learn that identity is not fixed, but fluid, that one can honor the past without being chained to it. They learn that courage is not always loud, that love does not require permanence, that healing is not about returning to what was, but about finding balance in what is. These lessons are not taught in schools. They are lived, slowly, quietly, often without recognition. And yet, they shape the future more than any decree or battle ever could. Because in the end, what remains is not what was preserved, but what was passed on, not in stone, but in gesture, in tone. In the way a mother sings to her child, a teacher corrects a mistake, a stranger shares bread. The light does not shine brightly, it flickers, it wavers, but it does not go out. And in its glow we see the truth, that even when civilizations fall, humanity endures not in glory, but in care. Long after the legions have vanished, long after the roads have grown quiet, and the letters no longer arrive, something endures, not as power, not as command, but as habit, as memory, as the quiet echo of a rhythm once known by millions. In a village in Gaul, a farmer walks his field at dawn, the sky pale above the hills, the air cool and damp with dew. He moves slowly, deliberately, tracing the same straight lines his grandfather used, aligning furrows with the sun, measuring distances by paces learned from Roman surveyors, decades ago though he does not know their names, cannot read Latin, and has never seen a map. Yet the order feels right, natural, even inevitable. His son follows behind, barefoot in the soft earth, learning the pattern without being taught, absorbing it through repetition, through the silent authority of routine. The boy does not ask why the rows must be so precise. He only knows that when they are, the crops grow better. The land remembers what the mind has forgotten. And so, without ceremony, the idea of measured earth continues, passed not through scrolls or decrees, but through footsteps in soil, through generations who never knew they were preserving anything at all. This is how legacy begins, not with declarations, but with repetition, with the unconscious carrying forward of what once made life easier, more predictable, more bearable. It lives in the body before it lives in the mind, in the hand before it lives in memory. In a small town near the Adriatic Sea, where olive trees cling to rocky slopes and goats climb paths too steep for carts, children gather each morning in a modest hall with wooden benches and whitewashed walls. There is no marble, no statue of Minerva, no imperial seal above the door, but they still begin the day the same way, reciting numbers, practicing letters, reading short passages from a weathered book held together by string and wax. The teacher, an older woman whose father was a scribe in the final years of imperial administration, corrects their pronunciation gently, taps the board with a stick of olive wood, and reminds them that grammar matters not for glory, not for status, but for clarity, for the ability to be understood, for the dignity of speaking truthfully. A boy stumbles over a sentence, his voice faltering. She waits. "Say it again," she says, slowly. "Let the words find their place." When he gets it right, she smiles, not with triumph, but with recognition. A moment, a simple correction, a quiet encouragement. It will never be remembered. And yet it carries within it the spirit of Rome's greatest gift, the belief that every mind can learn, that language can shape thought, that order in speech might lead to order in life. The empire did not teach literacy to impress, but to govern, to standardize, to unify. But now, long after governance has faded, the act of teaching remains, transformed, humbled, but alive. Not because someone decided to preserve it, but because it proved useful, because it helped people speak, understand, hope. Far to the east, in the hills of Cappadocia, where soft stone has been carved into homes, churches, and refuges for centuries, a community gathers each evening in a cave whose walls are painted with scenes of peace, of harvests, of shepherds watching over flocks beneath starry skies. They are not wealthy. They wear simple wool, eat bread made from local grain, draw water from a spring that flows year-round. But they live by rules written on a wooden tablet nailed beside the entrance rules about fairness, about sharing food, about resolving disputes through dialogue, not violence. These laws are not copied from Roman codes, nor do they bear Latin inscriptions. But they feel familiar, measured, balanced, concerned with justice rather than revenge. An elder explains them to the young each month, not as divine commandments, but as agreements made long ago when survival depended on trust. One night, a traveler asks where they came from. The elder shrugs. "We wrote them together," he says, "but I think someone else taught us how to think this way." He does not know the word use, has never heard of Cicero or Ulpian, but the principle remains woven into custom, protected by repetition, honored because it works. And so, without knowing it, they keep alive the deepest promise of Roman law, that people can live together not because they fear punishment, but because they believe in fairness, that conflict can be resolved without bloodshed, that a decision should be based on evidence, not force. The empire once used such practices to control provinces. Now freed from domination, the same principles are used to protect community. And in that transformation, the true meaning of justice survives not as a tool of power, but as a foundation of peace. In North Africa, where the sun burns white over ancient ruins and dust rises in slow spirals from abandoned forums, the well still functions not because it was repaired recently, but because no one ever stopped using it. Its arches are cracked, ivy winds through its pillars, birds nest in its vaults, their feathers drifting down into the darkness below. But every morning, families come with jugs tied with rope, lower them into the cool depths, and bring up water that tastes faintly of stone and time. A child laughs as she spills some on her feet. Her grandmother scolds her gently, then kneels to help refill the jug, her hands wrinkled but strong. They do not speak of engineers or aqueducts. They do not know the name of the man who designed this system centuries ago. But they respect the well not just for its water, but for its endurance, for the fact that it has outlived kingdoms, wars, emperors. When a stone loosens, someone fixes it. When debris clogs the opening, hands clear it. It's not out of duty to Rome, but out of care for home, for continuity, for the next generation. And in that care, the true purpose of infrastructure is fulfilled, not to glorify power, but to serve life. The aqueducts may have fallen silent, but the need they answered has not disappeared. And so, quietly, generation after generation, people continue the work not because they remember the beginning, but because they live in the middle of it, because the water still flows, because the earth still thirsts, because the hands that built it are gone, but the wisdom remains. Elsewhere along the Rhine, where forests stretch endlessly and rivers cut through misty valleys, a local council meets beneath a tree whose roots twist around the base of a broken column, half buried in moss and soil. They are not senators. They wear no togas. They speak a blend of languages, their accents shaped by borderlands and migration. Yet their meetings follow a structure that feels familiar. One speaks at a time, decisions are made by discussion, records are kept on wax tablets by a scribe who writes slowly, carefully, his stylus scratching softly in the morning light. When a dispute arises over land, over water, over stolen tools, they do not rush to violence. They listen. They ask questions. They seek balance. A young man scoffs at the process. "Why waste time talking?" he asks. An elder replies, "Because words can stop blood." No one claims this method came from Rome, but it bears its imprint the belief that conflict can be resolved without conquest, that listening is a form of strength, that order is not imposed, but agreed upon. The empire once used such practices to maintain control, to integrate provinces, to enforce loyalty. Now, freed from domination, the same principles are used to protect community, to prevent chaos, to allow life to continue. And in that transformation, the idea of civic life survives, not as domination, but as mutual care, not as hierarchy, but as shared responsibility. The eagle no longer flies over palaces, but its shadow lingers in the way people gather, speak, decide. In a monastery nestled in the mountains of southern Italy, where silence is sacred and time moves differently, monks copy not only religious texts, but fragments of Roman philosophy, medical treatises, agricultural manuals, preserving them not for power, but for usefulness. Their scriptorium is small, lit by oil lamps and narrow windows that catch the morning sun. The pages are fragile, some stained with wine or smoke, others missing corners. Still, they work line by line, word by word, knowing that these writings may never be read, but believing they should not be lost. One evening, a young novice asks why they bother with old knowledge that no one uses. The elder pauses, then opens a page from Galen's writings on healing, its margins filled with notes in Greek and Latin. "This saved a child last spring," he says. "When the fever came, we followed these steps. We didn't understand all of it, but enough." The novice nods, not fully convinced. But years later, when illness returns, he will reach for the same book. He will not know Galen. He will not care. But he will trust the text, because it worked before. In this way, knowledge becomes seed stored in silence, planted when needed, growing long after the gardener has died. The library of Alexandria burned. The schools of Athens closed. But the ideas did not vanish. They slipped into monasteries, into homes, into whispered remedies, into the hands of those who valued them not for prestige, but for survival. And so, without fanfare, the light of reason continues, not in grand halls, but in candlelit rooms, in quiet acts of preservation. In Hispania, a bridge still stands across a narrow river, its single arch intact, its stones fitted so tightly no mortar was needed, each piece shaped to lock perfectly with the next. No army crosses it. No emperor has seen it in generations, but farmers use it daily, leading goats, pulling carts, carrying firewood. Children running across it at dusk, daring each other to look down at the water below. When a storm damages one edge, neighbors gather to repair it, not because they are ordered, but because they need it. They do not call it a pontum. They have no name for the engineering technique, but they rebuild it the same way it was built, because it works. And so, without knowing it, they honor the Roman obsession with durability, with permanence, with building for centuries, not seasons. The empire wanted bridges to move armies, to project power, to connect provinces under one rule. Now, the same stones carry food to homes, children to school, elders to markets. Purpose has changed. Meaning has deepened. And in that shift, the true value of construction is revealed. Not to conquer land, but to connect people, to make life easier to endure. The bridge does not speak. It only stands. But in its silence, it teaches patience, precision, care. Even in Rome itself, where the Forum lies half buried under dust and weeds, where goats graze among fallen columns and birds nest in the hollows of statues, life continues in quiet ways. Woman sells bread from a stall near the remains of the Temple of Saturn. Her hands dusted with flour, her voice low as she greets regulars. Her grandson sweeps the steps each morning, not out of reverence, but because it keeps the space clean, because it's part of their routine. Tourists, though they are not called that, yet sometimes come from distant towns. Pointing at columns, asking about the city that once ruled the world, she shrugs. "It was here," she says. "Now we are," but she does not erase the past. She lets the stones remain, lets vines climb them, lets birds nest in their cracks. And when her grandson asks why they don't tear them down, she says, "Because they remind us that even great things change, that we can still stand." The ruins are no longer symbols of glory. They're teachers of humility, showing that nothing lasts forever, but also that life finds a way to grow through the cracks. That beauty persists even in decay, that memory does not require restoration to be meaningful. And so, across the former empire, the legacy takes shape not as a single monument, but as 1,000 small continuities. A judge in Carthage still weighs evidence before deciding, not because he reads Roman law, but because it feels right. A doctor in Antioch washes his hands before treating wounds. Following a practice inherited from Roman military medicine, though he does not know its origin. A poet in Gaul writes in rhythms that echo Virgil, though he has never read him, drawn to the cadence as if remembering a dream. None of them claim to be Roman, none of them mourn the empire. But they live inside its shadow, shaped by its systems, softened by its ideals, guided by its unseen hand. The eagle no longer flies over palaces, but its spirit lingers in the belief that laws should be written, that cities should have clean water, that education matters, that peace is better than war, that order is not control, but care. Because legacy does not require memory. It only requires practice. It lives in the way we build, speak, govern, heal, love. It is not announced. It does not demand recognition. It simply persists like breath, like tide, like the quiet certainty that some things, once learned, are too valuable to forget. And so, without fanfare, the world moves forward, not by erasing what came before, but by weaving it into the fabric of what comes next. Thread by thread, gesture by gesture, heart by heart, the empire fell. But what it carried, what it tried to be, not die. It changed form, it softened, became part of the soil, part of the song, part of the way we still unknowingly try to be kind. Long after the last person who remembered Rome has closed their eyes for the final time, something lingers, not as fact, not as record, but as presence, like warmth remaining in stone long after sunset. In a village in southern Gaul, an old woman sits by her hearth on a winter night, the fire low, its embers glowing like distant stars suspended beneath the surface of dark water. Rain taps gently against the shutters. The wind moves through cracks in the walls with a sound like distant conversation, and her grandson rests his head on her lap, half awake, his breathing slow and deep, matching the rhythm of the flames. He lifts his hand toward the flickering light, watching shadows dance across his fingers, then turns to her and asks about the stones they pass on their walks, broken columns, cracked arches, fragments of mosaic half buried in soil, their colors still faintly visible beneath moss and dust. She tells him stories, some true, some imagined, shaped by decades of retelling of a city so vast it touched every sea of roads that never ended. Of soldiers who marched without tiring, their sandals worn smooth by thousands of miles. She does not claim to have seen it. She heard it from her mother, who heard it from hers, each voice softening the edges, rounding the sharp corners of truth, until the story became less about empire and more about order, about a world where people believed tomorrow would be like today. The details shift with each telling: the color of a banner, the name of an emperor, the reason the world changed, but the feeling remains, that something great once was, and though it fell, it did not vanish. And as the boy listens, his eyelids grow heavy, the room fills with the scent of burning oak and wool, and a quiet reverence settles over them both, not for glory, but for continuity. This is how memory survives, not in books, but in voice, not in stone, but in breath. It changes shape, becomes more dream than document, yet still carries truth within it, like wine aged in clay, its flavor deepened by years of silence. Far to the east, in a monastery perched above the Aegean Sea, where waves murmur against cliffs and gulls cry at dawn, a monk copies a manuscript he does not fully understand. The text speaks of Roman law, of senators and provinces, of an order so vast it seemed eternal, written in Latin so formal it feels foreign even to those who know the language. He writes slowly, carefully, his hands steady, despite age, his quill scratching softly against parchment, the ink made from soot and gum Arabic, the same recipe used for centuries. He knows few will read this, fewer will care, but he continues not out of duty, not for fame, not because he believes in empires, but because someone once told him, "These words kept light alive once, they may again." And so, page by page, he guards what he cannot explain, preserving not just letters, but the possibility of meaning. Years later, another hand will open this book centuries from now, beneath electric light, in a language no one here knows, in a world where information flows instantly, yet wisdom feels scarce. That reader will not know the monk's name, may not even grasp the content, but they will feel, in the careful strokes of ink, in the margins filled with corrections and notes, a kind of love and act of faith across time, a belief that knowledge matters, that someone, someday, might need to know. Because memory is not just what we recall, it is what we choose to keep, even when we do not know why. And sometimes, the most powerful acts of remembrance are silent, unseen, made by those who believe that truth should not be lost, simply because the world has moved on. In North Africa, where the sun bleaches stone white and winds carry sand across ancient forums, A child discovers a coin half buried in the earth after a rare rainstorm. It is worn smooth, the face on it nearly gone, the letters around the edge faded into shadow, the metal green with age. He cleans it gently with water from a nearby well, rubs it between his fingers, holds it up to the light, turns it over and over, fascinated by its weight, its roundness, its silence. His father sees it and says only, "That was money from long ago." From when the world was different, the boy does not ask questions. He places the coin on his windowsill where moonlight touches it each night, where dew gathers on its surface in the early morning. He does not worship it. He does not study it. But he keeps it not because it is valuable, not because it connects him to power, but because it feels like a message, like proof that others walked here before him, that their hands held this same metal, that their hearts beat under the same sky, that they too looked up at the stars and wondered. And in that quiet keeping, the past is honored not through grand gestures, but through tenderness. Time gathers around the memory not in monuments, but in such small acts of saving, of noticing, of wondering, of refusing to let go of something small because it carries something infinite. Elsewhere along the Rhine, a shepherd leads his flock through mist at dawn. Following a path paved with stones laid centuries ago, their edges softened by rain and frost, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of footsteps. He does not know who built them, does not care. But he trusts them because they do not shift, do not crack, hold firm beneath rain and snow, guiding him safely across marshland where the ground gives way. One day he pauses, looks down, and notices a mark carved into one stone, an eagle. Wings spread, now softened by weather, its talons blurred, its head tilted slightly, as if looking toward the horizon. He traces it with his finger, feels the groove beneath his skin, then moves on without speaking. Later he tells no one. But that evening, back in his hut, he carves the same shape into the handle of his staff. Not as tribute, not as belief, not as understanding, but because it felt right. Because it connected him to something older than fear, older than war, older than nations. The empire wanted its symbols to command fear, to project power, to endure as proof of dominance. But now, long after dominion is past, the eagle survives not as a weapon, but as a whisper, a shape that resonates across time, carried forward not by force, but by quiet recognition. And so, without knowing it, the shepherd becomes a vessel of memory, passing it not through speech, but through gesture. Through the unconscious repetition of a form that once meant rule, but now means belonging. In Ravenna, where mosaics still glow in dim chapels with colors that refuse to fade, gold leaf catching candlelight. Blue tiles holding the depth of the Mediterranean sky, young girl sits on a bench beneath an image of a man in purple robes, surrounded by soldiers and angels, his eyes fixed forward, unblinking, eternal. Her teacher says he was an emperor, one of the last to rule from this city, that his decisions shaped the fate of millions. The girl stares at his face, so still, so serious, so far away. She wonders if he was kind, if he loved anyone, if he feared the end. No one can answer. The records speak of decrees, wars, alliances, but not of his heart, not of his loneliness, not of the weight he carried in silence. And so, she imagines it for herself. She tells her mother that night, "I think he was sad. I think he tried to save everything but couldn't." Her mother smiles, not correcting her, not dismissing her, because sometimes fiction carries more truth than history. The girl's compassion for a man dead for over 1,000 years is its own form of remembrance. Time gathers around the memory, not only through facts, but through empathy, through the courage to imagine the inner life of those who left no diary, no confession, no farewell. And in that act of gentle wonder, the past becomes not a monument, but a mirror. On an island in the Aegean, an old fisherman mends his net by lamplight, humming a tune without words, a melody passed down from his grandfather, who learned it from his father, who sang it while pulling nets beneath a moonlit sky. A visitor, curious, asks if it has a name. The fisherman shakes his head. "No name," he says. "But my father sang it when he came home late, when the sea was rough." The visitor listens closely, recording nothing, only absorbing. Later, a scholar will note that the rhythm matches an ancient hymn to Poseidon. Long thought lost, its lyrics vanished, its music preserved only in fragments. But the fisherman does not know this. He does not care. He sings it because it calms him, because it connects him to those who came before, because it feels like home, because it reminds him that he is part of a chain longer than memory. And in that unknowing, the past survives, not as knowledge but as feeling. Language fades, beliefs change, but melody, like water, finds its way through the cracks of time, carrying the soul of a people long after their names have vanished. The empire had poets, musicians, theaters filled with song. None of that remains as it was. But echoes linger in lullabies and work chants, in the way a voice rises and falls when speaking of the sea. In Rome itself, where goats graze among ruins and ivy climbs the ribs of broken temples, where children play hide-and-seek between fallen columns, a traveler sits on a fallen column at twilight, watching the sky turn from gold to indigo, then to black scattered with stars. He does not take pictures, does not read plaques. He only listens to the wind moving through marble, to distant laughter, to the rustle of leaves, to the occasional bark of a dog from a nearby home. And slowly he begins to feel something, not sadness, not awe, but presence, as if the city is not dead, but sleeping. As if the voices of those who walked, here soldiers, mothers, scholars, slaves, merchants, priests, are not gone, but folded into the air, into the stone, into the roots of trees, waiting not to be worshipped, but to be witnessed. He closes his eyes and whispers, "I remember you." Not because he knew them, not because he studied them, but because he feels them. And in that moment, memory becomes communion. Time gathers around the memory, not through study, but through silence, through the willingness to be still, to receive what is not said aloud. The greatest monuments are not built of marble, but of attention, of someone pausing, listening, honoring what cannot be seen. In a schoolroom in modern-day Tunisia, a child reads a paragraph about the fall of Rome. The words are clear, the timeline precise. The causes listed like items on a list: corruption, invasion, economic decline. But something feels missing. After class, she asks her teacher, "Did anyone miss it? I mean, really miss it?" The teacher pauses, looks out the window, where palm trees sway in the breeze. "Yes," she says softly, "not the power, not the armies, but the idea that tomorrow would be like today, that the roads would stay open, the lights would stay on, the world made sense." The girl thinks about this all evening. That night, she dreams of walking down a long road lined with statues, all facing forward, none looking back. She walks for hours, but the road never ends. She wakes with a strange ache in her chest, grief not for what she lost, but for what someone else once lost. And though she will forget the dream by morning, the feeling remains woven into her understanding of time, of impermanence, of how deeply humans cling to stability. Memory is not only personal, but it is collective. It lives in culture, in education, in the questions we ask, in the way we sense absence, even when we never knew what was present. And so, across the centuries, the memory of Rome softens, spreads, dissolves like ink dropped in water, forming shapes that drift and merge, losing definition but gaining depth. Is no longer a single story, but many. A lesson in schools, a scene in a film, a word whispered in prayer, a design copied in a courthouse, a proverb repeated without knowing its origin. Emperors become legends. Laws become customs. Roads become myths, yet the essence remains not in triumph, but in the quiet hum of continuity. A judge still seeks fairness. A builder still values strength. A parent still teaches their child to speak clearly. None of them say, "I am continuing Rome," but in their actions they do, because legacy is not what survives intact. It is what transforms, adapts, and persists in new forms, like a river that no longer runs in one channel, but nourishes the land in countless ways. Because time does not erase, it gathers. It folds moments into layers, like sediment building over millennia, until the past is not beneath us, but within us. We walk on roads shaped by Roman feet. We speak laws inspired by their minds. We live in cities planned with their logic. But more than that, we carry their hopes, their fears, their longing for order in chaos, for meaning in loss. The empire fell. But what it carried, what it dreamed of, did not die. It changed shape, became part of the air we breathe, the systems we trust, the quiet belief that even when things end, something of them goes on. And so, without fanfare, without ceremony, the memory lives not in ruins but in us. In the way we pause before speaking, in the way we build to last, in the way we still, after all this time, try to be kind. There are moments when the past does not feel distant at all, not like a book closed, not like a road vanished into mist, but like a voice speaking just behind you, so soft that you're not sure if you heard it or imagined it. In a quiet room somewhere in the world, perhaps where you are now, someone breathes slowly, eyes closed, listening to these words. The screen casts a gentle glow on their face. The air is still, a blanket rests over their legs, and outside, night has settled completely. Stars scattered across an endless sky, unseen by city lights. They do not know the names of emperors or the date of battles. They have never walked through ruins or studied Latin, but they feel something shift within them, a quiet recognition. Like remembering a dream upon waking, like hearing a melody you've never learned but somehow know by heart. This is how history truly survives, not in grand declarations, but in such subtle ways. In the way we pause before speaking harshly, in the way we build bridges to connect rather than walls to divide, in the way we still, after all this time, try to make sense of the world. The empire fell, but its echoes remain, not in monuments, not in textbooks, but in us. And tonight, as you rest, you may find that one of those whispers brushes against your mind. Not loud, not urgent, but tender, like wind moving through olive trees at dusk, like water touching stone after centuries of absence. In a modern city far from Rome, where glass towers rise above ancient streets, a woman walks home late beneath a sky streaked with cloud and fading light, her footsteps echoing softly on pavement, laid over stones once trodden by Roman feet. She does not think of them. She thinks of her child waiting at home, of dinner to prepare, of the quiet comfort of lamplight, of the warmth of a cup of tea in her hands when she arrives. But when she passes a fountain in a small square, its design simple, circular, fed by clean water that flows without interruption. She pauses, watches the stream fall into the basin with a soft, steady murmur, and feels, without knowing why, a deep sense of peace. It is not the beauty alone. It is the idea that water has been brought here on purpose, that someone thought of thirst, of beauty, of stillness, of the need for a place where people can gather, sit, breathe. Centuries ago, an engineer stood over blueprints, calculating gradients, choosing materials, dreaming of aqueducts that would carry life across deserts, through mountains, into cities where millions would drink without ever knowing his name. He did not know her. He could not imagine this city, this moment, this woman pausing in silence. But his care endures, not in memory, but in function, in the fact that water still flows where people gather, that cleanliness is expected, that public space is meant for rest. And so, without ceremony, without awareness, she honors him, not with praise, not with a statue, but with presence, with the simple act of stopping, breathing, feeling the cool air near the fountain, allowing herself a moment of stillness in a world that rarely asks us to slow down. This is how legacy lives, in unnoticed moments, in the quiet gratitude for what works, for what lasts, for what was built, not for glory, but for life. Elsewhere, in a courtroom lit by electric light, a judge listens to two neighbors arguing over land, one claiming the boundary has shifted after years of rain and erosion, the other insisting the line has always been there, marked by a stone long buried. The judge does not rush. She asks questions gently, examines old records written in faded ink, speaks to witnesses who remember childhood games played near the edge of the field, measures the ground with tools passed down through generations of surveyors. When she rules, she explains her reasoning clearly, fairly, without favor, ensuring both parties understand not just the decision, but the principle behind it. Afterward, a young clerk asks why she takes so much time for such a small case. She looks up, thoughtful, her hands resting on the wooden desk worn smooth by decades of use. Because fairness matters, she says. Even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. She does not mention Rome. She has never read Cicero. She does not know the word Aquitus, nor the debates of Ulpian or Paulus. But in her patience, in her belief that justice should be visible, understandable, grounded in evidence and reason, she carries forward a spirit older than nations. The empire once used law to control, to unify, to project power. Now, long after its fall, the same principles endure, not as domination, but as protection, not as force, but as balance, not as fear, but as trust. And in that quiet courtroom, under artificial light, the idea of use, of right, of order, of dignity, still breathes. Passed not through conquest, but through choice, through the daily, uncelebrated work of believing that people deserve to be treated with honesty. In a schoolyard at dusk, children play a game that needs no instructions. They run, laugh, call out, form teams, argue over rules, then agree on new ones, their voices rising and falling like waves. The teacher watches from a bench, sipping tea, smiling, wrapped in a shawl against the cooling air. Scrapes his knee. Another helps him up, shares his water, walks with him to the edge of the playground until he stops limping. No one applauds, no lesson is given, but the moment holds weight. Centuries ago, in forums and baths, Romans spoke of humanitas, not just humanity, but kindness, civility, the art of living together, of treating others with respect even when they are different. They taught it through rhetoric, philosophy, public service. Now it lives in such small acts, in helping a friend, in sharing what you have, in laughing together beneath an open sky, in the instinctive refusal to let someone suffer alone. The empire wanted to spread civilization through roads and armies, through language and law. But the truest form of it was never imposed. It was lived quietly, in gestures like this. So without knowing it, these children keep alive something essential, not through study, but through play. Through instinct, through the natural impulse to care, to include, to heal. The future is not built in palaces. It is shaped here, in dirt and laughter, in the way one hand reaches out to another without thinking. In a hospital room bathed in the soft glow of monitors, a doctor washes her hands before entering, careful, thorough, almost ritualistic in her attention. Fingers, palms, wrists, undernails, each motion precise, repeated, ingrained. She does not think of ancient Rome. She thinks of germs, of safety, of duty, of the patient inside who cannot afford an infection. But this habit, this belief that cleanliness prevents harm, traces back to Roman military medicine. 2 engineers who understood that pure water kept soldiers alive, 2 cities built with sewers and public baths to protect public health, 2 laws requiring latrines and drainage. They did not know of bacteria. They had no microscopes. But they observed, tested, built systems that worked. And now, long after their names have faded, their insight endures. Not as theory, but as practice, as routine, as something so normal it is no longer questioned, as automatic as breathing. The doctor does not recite their names. She only follows the path they began. And in doing so, she becomes part of a chain of care stretching across centuries, each link unaware of the last, yet held together by the same quiet commitment to heal, to protect, to serve, to believe that order can prevent suffering. The empire may have fallen, but its greatest gift, the idea that society should care for the body as well as the soul, lives on in every sterile room, every clean bandage, every hand washed in silence. On a train crossing southern France, the landscape unfolding beyond the window in golden hues of late afternoon, a man opens a notebook and begins to write. Not an email, not a text, but longhand, with pen and paper. The ink spreading slightly on the page. His words are slow, deliberate, filled with observation, with reflection. He describes the light on the fields, the rhythm of the rails, the faces of strangers passing by, the way one woman smiled at her child, how the conductor's voice softened when he spoke to an elderly passenger. He does not write for publication. He writes because it helps him think, because putting words to paper slows his mind, brings clarity, allows him to feel more deeply. Centuries ago, Roman philosophers walked gardens, writing letters to friends, exploring ethics, reason, the nature of peace. Seneca wrote to Lucilius about time, about death, about how to live well. They believed in the power of language to shape the soul, to bring order to chaos, to connect hearts across distance. Now, long after scrolls have turned to dust, that practice continues, not in palaces, but in trains, cafes, bedrooms, wherever someone picks up a pen to understand themselves. The empire valued rhetoric for persuasion, for politics, but its deeper gift was the belief that thinking matters, that writing can be a form of healing, that truth is found not only in crowds, but in silence. And so, without knowing it, this man keeps the flame alive, not through doctrine, but through honesty, through the courage to listen to his own mind, to ask, what does this mean? How should I live? In a kitchen at night, warm with the scent of bread and herbs, a mother teaches her daughter how to knead dough, not with machines, but with hands. Feeling the texture change, learning its rhythm, understanding when it's ready, she tells her you have to be patient. Let it rest. It knows when it's time. The girl listens, mimics her movements, laughs when flour flies into her hair, wipes it away with the back of her wrist. This moment, simple, intimate, timeless, carries within it the spirit of Rome's greatest achievement, the transmission of knowledge not through force, but through care. The empire built schools, copied texts, established curricula, but the deepest learning has always happened like this. In homes, in gardens, in quiet lessons passed from hand to hand, voice to voice, heart to heart, a grandmother teaching a recipe, a father showing how to mend a roof, a neighbor explaining which plants heal and which poison. These were the threads that held the world together, stronger than law, quieter than war. So, while libraries burned and academies closed, this method survived, unbroken, unseen, eternal, because civilization is not measured by monuments, but by how we teach our children to live, to love, to belong. And so, across the world in countless unseen moments, the echoes continue, in the way a traveler respects another's customs, in the way a leader listens before speaking, in the way someone plants a tree they will never sit under, in the way a stranger offers help without expecting thanks. They are human ones, but they were shaped by a world that once believed in order, in endurance, in the possibility of peace. In the idea that a single law could apply to all, that a road could connect strangers, that water should be for everyone. The eagle no longer flies over palaces, the legions no longer march. But the ideals, softened, humbled, transformed, live on in the way we build, speak, govern, love. Not because we remember, but because we inherited them, like breath, like blood, like the unconscious rhythm of a heart that beats the same way it did 2,000 years ago, carrying the same hopes, the same fears, the same longing for a world that makes sense. Because history does not end. It changes form, dissolves into culture, into language, into the quiet decisions we make each day. To be fair, to be kind, to keep going even when the future is unclear. The fall of Rome was not a single event. It was a long twilight, a slow release, a transformation so gradual that no one noticed it happening. And its afterglow still touches us. In the laws we follow, the cities we inhabit, the books we read, the dreams we dare to have of a world that makes sense. You do not need to visit ruins to feel it. You only need to pause, breathe, notice the water from your tap, the street beneath your feet, the right to speak, to learn, to hope. All of it carries a whisper, faint, fragile, but persistent, of a world that tried, that believed, that built, not just for today, but for tomorrow, for children not yet born. And so, as you lie there now, perhaps in darkness, perhaps wrapped in warmth, perhaps already drifting toward dreams, know this: You are not separate from that world. You are part of its continuation. Your breath connects to theirs. Your questions mirror theirs. If you're longing for peace, for meaning, for belonging, this is the true legacy. Not conquest, not gold, not glory, but care. And in that care, across centuries, across silence, across loss, we remain connected, not by empire, but by humanity, not by force, but by the quiet choices we make, again and again, to be kind, to remember, to build something that might last. Because the past is not behind us, it is within us. In the way we speak, in the way we love, in the way we still, after all this time, try to make things better. And though Rome fell, its soul did not die, it changed shape. It became part of the air we breathe, the systems we trust, the stories we tell at night to help us sleep. And so, as you close your eyes, let yourself drift into dreams where marble paths wind through silent forums, where water flows through ancient arches, where voices whisper in Latin, not to command, but to remember. Let the empire rest, and let you rest too. And so we come to the end of this long twilight, the slow passage through a world that once believed itself eternal, now softened into memory, cradled in silence. You have walked its streets, breathed its air, felt the weight of its peace, and the quiet tremor of its decline. You have stood beside those who lived not in history books, but in homes lit by oil lamps, in fields warmed by sun, in moments of doubt, courage, love, and letting go. And though the empire has fallen, though its roads grow quiet and its forums sleep beneath moss and dust, something of it remains, not in conquest, not in stone, but in the way we still seek order, fairness, belonging. If you're listening from a room wrapped in darkness, perhaps under a blanket, perhaps already drifting toward dreams, know that you are not far from where we've been. The chair you sit on, the lamp beside you. The very idea of law, of clean water, of a road that connects one place to another, these are not accidents, they are echoes. Fragments of a dream that began long ago, carried forward not by emperors, but by ordinary hands. By quiet choices made in dimly lit rooms, by people who simply tried to do their best in uncertain times. And in that continuity, there is comfort. Not because greatness lasts, but because care does. Because kindness once planted can grow for centuries. Even when no one remembers the name of the one who first sowed the seed. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for closing your eyes, for breathing slowly, for allowing yourself to be here in this moment, in this story. If you'd like to share where you're listening from, if you're near the sea, or nestled in the mountains, if it's raining outside your window, or the stars are clear above your roof, I would love to know. Your presence, gentle and still, becomes part of this living memory, just as the whispers of those who came before still reach us across the ages. Now let yourself sink a little deeper. Let your breath slow, as if you were lying on warm stone beneath an olive tree, the sky vast above you, the wind moving softly through leaves. Let the weight of the day leave your body, carried off like dust on a breeze. There is nothing more to do, nothing left to fix. Only this moment, this stillness, this quiet companionship between you and the past. Let the marble paths fade into shadow. Let the fountains fall silent. Let the last guards walk away from the gates, not in defeat, but in peace. Let the empire rest. It held the world for a time. It tried. And in trying, it left behind not perfection, but possibility that civilization is not built in a day, nor destroyed in one night, but shaped slowly, quietly, by countless unseen hands. And so, as you drift toward sleep, imagine a single column standing beneath the moon, ivy winding around its base, stars reflected in the puddle at its feet. No one tends it. No one speaks its name, but it remains. And in its silence, it says everything. We were here, we loved, we tried. And you too belong to this long, gentle story. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Breathe deeply, and let yourself drift into dreams where forgotten cities breathe again, where voices whisper in Latin, not to command, but to remember, where you walk not as conqueror or scholar, but as witness, as keeper of quiet light. There will be other stories, other sunsets, other worlds dissolving into night. But for now, rest. The past is safe, and so are you. Good night.